All right. Good evening. This is the gift of financial stewardship with your host, Toby Mathis. And I'm going to be going over this is the big one, the last of the five steps before you all can start attending the monthly meetings. We have the monthly meetings on the first Wednesday of just about every month. Every now and again, we have to push one back if we have a conflict on dates. But for the most part, on the first Wednesday, and we send out notice and everything else. So everybody here who has gone through the first five steps will get to go to and kind of step it up last week, or like this month, I should say. The topic actually was last week. We had to push it back 1 week. The topic was candlesticking and trend and using trends in the stock market. So it was pretty interesting. I had a gal on who had taken an initial investment of $2,000 in 25 months, turned it into a little over $2 million. Guy named Mark K. Latimer, is a good friend of mine for about 20 years. She did put an extra, I think there was a margin call once at $750. So, you know, they go through the calculations whenever somebody makes a claim like that. They actually back it up, or she backs it up. She teaches candlesticking, so the SEC sticks its nose in. So if you say anything like that, they make you go through. So she was a customer service rep. It was pretty interesting. Customer service rep for a financial company, and just learned all the principles on her own. So that's the type of stuff we do during the monthly stewardship meetings. We go in and we just try to keep educating ourselves, learning what folks do, so that we can be of better use to those around us. Tonight, though, we're going to be talking about creating a dynasty. And this is one of my favorite webinars to teach, simply because we get to do some future tripping and we can break down some of the myths insofar as what a lot of times we perceive is what we're capable of doing when it comes to creating a long-lasting plan. In other words, sometimes we'll hamstring ourselves when we're not hamstringed. We won't realize that we have everything available to us to create a very long-term plan and vision that we can put in place and do a tremendous amount of good for our families, and we don't even realize that the pieces are sitting right there, and you kind of count yourself out, or a lot of people do. So my job's to point out what's capable. So, like every time, we want to go through and we want to reiterate the 7 rules of financial stewardship, which is rule number 1: decide to become a steward. You guys have all done it. If this is your 5th event, I know some people miss. Go back and watch the recordings. Just make sure you're getting a kind of all the bases covered, so you have a pretty good idea of each of the 3 buckets that we talk about, and how to put a blueprint together. But just by being here, I know that you've already made that decision. By showing up at Dynasty, you made that decision. Get rid of poor thinking. For some of us, that's a lifelong thing. We're always falling back into bad habits. It's not allowing ourselves to be misled or brought down. It was interesting. I had a member of your community that was doing a financial transaction. I told her what the other side would say. I said, they will tell you that you're not allowed to do certain things. And you have to keep pushing them and pushing them, because they're wrong. They're telling you something that's in their best interest to keep you from taking control. And sure enough, she starts getting the pushback. And I said, no matter what they say, you just continue to be persistent. And eventually then they came out and said, yeah, you could do it. But they denied it, and they supposedly had to talk to 3 other people and all this stuff. And what it is it's wrestling for control. We're very quick to allow other people to control our money and to actually give it to other people. Literally giving them control, saying, you know better to do with the funds that I'm entrusted with than I do. And then we're surprised when they take it and treat it like it's theirs. And so we're going to get rid of that thinking. And part of that is just saying, no, I'm going to be responsible for myself. Number three is assuming that duty, saying, hey, I'm not just going to do it just for me. I'm going to do it for those around me. I'm going to take on the responsibility of saying, when I see something and I realize that there's truth in some of the principles that we talk about, it's not just to keep them to yourself, but it's to share them. So the situation was, this one was regarding a retirement plan. And I said they're going to do everything they can to keep you from moving your retirement plan. You're fully entitled to do what you want with your retirement plan. And this was in the case of an IRA. And they're like, you can't do this, you can't do that. No, we can't. If you want the funds, then we're going to have to withhold penalties and taxes and all this nonsense. And I said, no, that's not true. They're just doing that to scare you so that you'll let them continue to have your money. And 100% of that is true. Now, what did I get out of it? Nothing. I don't care. I just look at it from the standpoint of that if you're my client, I'm going to make sure I'm saying what's in your best interest. I'm not a financial advisor. I don't manage money. I don't have anybody's money in my control that's not mine. It's not my job, but my job is to show other people how they can control theirs. Birds of a feather, we all want to be together. People that think in a particular way or decided to take on responsibility, they tend to flock together. Good parents tend to flock together. People that believe in family tend to flock together. People that like a lot of drugs and alcohol tend to flock together. So it's just deciding who do you want to be, and do you want to be around someone who cares about that? Obviously, in Danny's community, a lot of people similar thinking, so they love being around each other. Next rule 5, plan like a steward. Planning means putting things in place so that you are not dependent on a government or third parties to take care of you. Putting things in place to where you don't run out. And stewards, my favorite example is the guy that's on the boat, and you got 3 months that you're going to be at sea, and he's in charge of the stores, the food and the water and things like that. If you do not plan accordingly, you kill the whole ship. And that's the way I kind of look at it. It's not just me. I have a lot of responsibilities. I want to make sure that there's a lot of people that rely on me, not just from a business standpoint where I have 100 of them, but from family members and daughter in college and things like that, where I'm like, hey, I need to make sure that I'm not just going out and blowing myself up. I need to make sure that I have a good plan in place and that I'm thinking about things deliberately. What if somebody decides to text instead of drive? And but they think they can do both at the same time, and they blow a stop sign or a red light and slam into me. I need to make sure that things are in place to where someone's advocating for me, that my family's taken care of if something like that happens, even if it doesn't kill me, even if it just messes me up real good. Rule number 6 is shifting spending into savings. Instead of just going out and buying a big screen TV or whatever else, taking a look and saying, what does it really mean? What does it mean to me? How much am I really paying? If I know that for every $500 that I plant, and I'm going to use that word deliberately, it's seed. If I plant that in a savings account, this is how much crop it's going to create. If I use that seed up on stuff that I don't really need, what's the true cost? $10,000 now, 30 years from now, that may be worth 40 or 50,000 or more. So do I really want to spend 10,000 on something frivolous? And so you start shifting spending things that you don't need but may want into savings, and then never rely on one source of income. Setting things up to where you can get what you want. There's nothing wrong with taking care of needs and then getting to take care of the wants. Once those are taken care of, then entertaining the wants. It's great when you have investments where you can tie to a particular want. Like if I want to drive a nice car, great. It's 123 Main Street is paying for my car. Whatever I can get out of that is what I'm using for a car. If I want to live in a nice house, okay, then I have a couple different rentals or whatever that are paying for that. Or I have a note that's kicking off interest, or I have intellectual property that's generating a licensing fee, whatever. But you have the money that's being generated from an asset going for a want. And then I'm never dependent on one person's salary. If I have a job, no matter how good that job is, if I lose that job, chances are it's going to be pretty painful, unless I'm using that money wisely and shifting that spending into savings. Then maybe I'll have another source, maybe I'll have assets that maybe I'd be able to get myself out of trouble. What I know for sure is that if I put things in place, insofar as if I get cash flow assets that are paying, and I have other sources of income. So, an example would be I have a few rentals, I have stocks that I'm either, dividend paying stock, or writing calls on things that are generating capital for me, notes where it's kicking off interest, intellectual property that's kicking off a royalty. I have different sources of income. Then if I lose my job, it's not the end of the world. I have other things that I can fall back on. So that's the idea, is never relying on one source of income. Because, man, when I see a lot of pain is when people are relying on one spouse to bring in the money, and then something happens to that spouse. It's horrific. And so that's kind of what we don't want. We want to make sure that we have other sources of income, so we're not depending on somebody's work. All right. Oops. See? All right. So we're on the last step of the 5 steps, making your financial vision a reality. And I hope that sometimes you think about your financial vision and say, what do I think it's going to look like? Let's see. We've already done how the financial industry is ripping us off. Whoops, go back. Trigger my pen. So we have that bad boy. Let's see, protecting your treasures, creating your blueprint, getting to give. So in the very first one, we went over with David McShane joined us. We went over just kind of how the financial industry is kind of hoodwinking, is how they're taking control of our funds, and what that means for us. The average is about 70% of your money, of your retirement, tends to go to the financial industry, as opposed to staying in our retirement accounts where it should be. It goes to the parties that manage that industry, which kind of stinks. Protecting your treasures is taking a look and saying what you care about and designing ways to make sure that third parties can't take it away from you. Creating your blueprint is actually blueprinting out what a financial plan would look like you, not just a financial plan, but the asset protection plan and the estate plan. Everything, but just kind of mapping it out, putting it in a visual depiction. There's something powerful about it. We had Greg on last week going over Gaining to Give, and I know we were doing a lot of, we got into a lot of tax, I know that. And then tonight is Creating Your Dynasty, which is we kind of put it all together and figure out how do we wrap it up and make sure that it goes on for a long time, way out into the future. So tonight's going to be, again, we get to future trip a little bit. So last step, creating your dynasty. So the first thing you should be asking yourself is, what is a dynasty? I always joke. There's one. There's a new one out there too. That one. So if you want some bad camo and you want to grow some facial hair, you could be a Duck Dynasty. If you want to have big hair, you could be the Dynasty. But what it really means is a family that is successful for a long period of time. And I'm assuming that, we could say it's biological family, or it could be figurative family, but it's the people that you care about, it's the organizations you care about. They can live a lot longer than us, and that's going to be one of the principles that we go over later. Is something that we talk about is how do you create things that don't have a lifespan that's tied to our own. Kind of tough to think about, but easy to do once you realize what to look for. So we're going to be designing a plan that creates success. I want you guys just to think real quick before we go to the next. Keep on moving on. What is success to you? What does it look like? Have you ever said, man, I know that I'm where I need to be, and this is the position I want to be in, and I would be happy? Because if you don't define it, it has a funny way of moving. And so Hans, in his rich, miserable bastard quadrants, kind of hits on that there's something else besides just money. You have to define what real success means. And a lot of folks, it's not just money. It's not cars, it's not houses. There could be a respect component to it. There could be a component of making sure that your family's taken care of. There's a lot of different components to it. So, or it could just be freedom, the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it, and not being beholden to a job. One of the things that's interesting is when people no longer work for money, it doesn't mean they work less hard. In fact, for the most part, I've seen them, they work harder. It's they work on things that they like. So what we're going to learn tonight, we're going to be going over doing the right thing. We're going to be talking about systems and supervision, why judges make us miserable, 3 ways to build multi-generation wealth. This is the important part that cannot be taken away. No, grandkids marry the wrong person and or people, and find that they're giving a big chunk of your estate away, or your children, same thing. Maybe you're giving your assets and you have one child and you say, oh, I'll just give it to my child. And then once they have it, it's in their realm. And they can do lots of bad things with it. When I say bad, things that you wouldn't want them to do with it. It could all end up with their spouse that maybe didn't care for, or maybe didn't have the same ideals, maybe to a creditor. Maybe their child does something that then they end up having to pay for. And there goes the things that you left, that you wanted to benefit, multi-generations being sucked away in one. That happens. So we're going to go over all of that. Big stuff for tonight. And these are the terms that I want you to, by the time we're done, you should know these terms. It's really kind of a big thing is that you get down the verbiage, the language that we use in estate planning and planning, because a lot of times they treat it like it's a secret language. But if you know these basic terms, you'll be able to have an intelligent conversation with just about anybody that's in the estate planning world, and that goes for advisors, attorneys, and accountants. And a lot of times the way that they take control of our assets is through confusion and making you feel like somehow you're not smart enough to handle your own stuff. So we're going to take that away. By the end of the night, you will have the basics down, and you'll be able to hold your own with just about anybody. And if you're not 100%, well, that's why we record these. You go back and listen to it. All right, so definitions for tonight. The first one is probate. What is probate? Does anybody know what probate is? You can use the question and answer section. I want to see whether anybody has any ideas of what probate is. I'm sure a few of you guys have been through it. See if anybody has any idea. There we go. Yes, my cousin's husband died over 3 years ago, and the house just got out of probate. I know it takes place after death, but I don't understand it. State judgment of your estate. Legal process for distributing an estate, where a judge decides for you where your stuff will go. Property passed down through the courts. All very good. So probate is the legal process in which a decedent's estate is distributed. In English, it means a judge decides where your stuff will go. That doesn't mean they can just willy-nilly decide it. They follow the law. They follow the decedent's wishes to the extent that it's documented as well. So the most common probate is when somebody, the vast majority is people don't do anything. And then that's called intestate. And when you die intestate, that's like our friend Prince left no written record, no will, no nothing of where he wanted his assets to go. So then the state comes in and imposes its laws on the situation as to who will get what. And so in Prince's case, a sibling, or not a sibling, but a child of the decedent that's is the same as a half-child of the decedent. So in other words, it doesn't matter whether you married mom, you are going to be treated, or I'm trying to think if he has anybody that's not biological. I think it's all biological. So regardless of whether you married mom, you're going to have same rights. So we had one, I'm not sure if he just had one acknowledged child. I should probably take a peek at that. But there's like 5 or 6 children, Prince, that are all looking for a piece of the estate, and they would all be treated equally under Minnesota law. That's probate. Probate process, which we'll go into some great detail later on, but I mean it's definitely a court process. Definitely takes a while, about 18 months. And whenever you go to court, you need to have those guys in the suits, and you got to have the guy or the gal in the robe making decisions. So it tends to get a little pricey. Every time you walk in there, you got 3 or 4 of them. So probate is just a fancy way of saying going to court to decide who gets what. Then we have trusts. Does anybody want to decide, take a shot at what is a trust? Just a basic definition. Come on, you guys can try. What is a trust? Let's see, there we go. Entity to put assets in. A contract where you decide where the stuff goes. It's getting pretty good. Anybody else want to take a whack? Let's see. Here we go. Asset protection, triangle, grantor, beneficiary, a genuinely protected will, entity that holds possessions. My mom had a trust. What it meant to me was her husband left with everything. So she had a trust where she left it all. So here's the thing. Trust is just a contract. It's a contract, and there's 3 parties. Let me just change the color here of my pen so I can write this. So a trust is just a contract between a grantor, a trustee who watches over an asset, and a beneficiary. This could all be plural. So it would be grantors, trustees, and beneficiaries if you have a married couple, for example. The trustee just has successors, as do the beneficiaries. So I set up a trust, what's called a grantor trust, meaning that the grantor and the beneficiary are the same. So I create a trust. I watch over it during my lifetime for my benefit. That's why we call them a living trust. It's a lifetime trust. If something happens to me, like I say, hey, I don't want to manage my things, then I have a successor trustee. Or if I get disabled, then I have another trustee. Or if I die, then it means I have another trustee. And then I have successor beneficiaries. During my lifetime, I'm the beneficiary. What happened with you, I don't want to, I'll just leave the name off, but the gal who had the mom with the trust, and she left everything to the husband, there's something called a Q-tip, qualified terminal interest provision, that I use in trusts. And what it just means is when one spouse passes, their half of the estate becomes irrevocable, meaning the surviving spouse can't change it, take it all. There's restrictions, gives rights to some of the beneficiaries. A lot of people don't use those. They just give it to the surviving spouse. The problem with that is the surviving spouse could do other things with it that you didn't intend. There's a lot of pretty interesting situations. I'm not going to get into some of the more distasteful ones, but there's a few where, unintentionally, spouse passes and the surviving spouse, doesn't handle it so well, makes some bad decisions, and ends up giving things away. Remember the Anna Nicole Smith case? I think her husband was 90 years old. She was a 28-year-old Playboy model, and of course the billions of dollars didn't mean anything. She was just in love with a 90-year-old man. Infirmed. He didn't last very long after she married him. Sounds like love to me. Love of money. So there, in its most simple sense, you have a trust is just a contract. And because it's in the trust, because assets are held in the trust, it means that we don't need a judge to come in and tell us how we should distribute those assets. It's already covered. There's a contract. We don't need it. So trusts are very useful in estate planning, but they are useful in a lot of things. Because it's taking something out of your name, it's a great tool for things like real estate. There's liability when you have things in your name. So it becomes a great vehicle to get things away from you and transfer that liability elsewhere, like an LLC or something along those lines. They're also fantastic because you can create a trust that's irrevocable. And we'll go over what that means here, because we have a revocable as one of our definitions, but you can create them to be irrevocable so that when you're transferring an asset, it can't be changed during your lifetime. Here we go, it's done. You can't change it. Somebody else might be able to, you give them that right, or you're just making it immediately irrevocable, it's done. Other than perhaps Scribner's errors, you can lock these things down. The next definition is power of attorney. And a power of attorney is giving somebody rights over your body or your finances. So folks will come up and say, hey, you know what, I'm too young to do estate planning. Fantastic. I'm glad, I understand why you feel that way. You think that things aren't going to happen, but, it could be simple. It could be a car accident. Now, who's talking to the doctors for you? Well, I have some friends, or I have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever. They can't talk to the doctor. The doctor can't talk to them. I mean, the doctor can talk to them, but they're not going to be able to share your medical information, and they certainly won't listen to them. So they may say, Toby's been in an accident, but if you want to, if I want someone to be able to make decisions on my behalf, I have to put it in writing. Those of you who are married might say, well, my spouse would get to. Okay. Spouse might be able to, but the doctor doesn't have to until they know for certain this is the spouse. How are they going to know it's your spouse? Because you say so? It's not good enough. They'd actually have to see some documentation or know. A lot of them are going to be looking for someone to talk to run things by. It doesn't mean that they're bound by it. So power of attorney is a fantastic vehicle. Part of a good estate plan, you're going to have a power of attorney not just for your person, but also for your finances. My father, as you guys may know, had Alzheimer's for many years before he passed. Um, During that time, he was not able to make financial decisions. So we had a power of attorney to my mother. On multiple occasions, she had to use that power of attorney to assert rights on behalf of my father. Things like getting coverage under insurance, dealing with retirement plans, dealing with his money. And somebody could normally just say, hey, I can't talk to you, you're not authorized. And the power of attorney takes that off the table. Included along with the power of attorney, if it's, for example, for medical matters, you got to make sure you have a HIPAA disclosure. We have the, what is it, Health Insurance Patient Portability Act that says, hey, you can't share somebody's medical information without their consent. So this will allow someone to step in the shoes and act on their behalf with actually knowing what's going on with a certain amount of intelligence with information. Let's see, would the same proof be needed for a power of attorney in the hospital? Yeah. There's been a number of situations where somebody came in. This is where it really gets bad, is if it's a couple that are together but they haven't been married yet. And if they are at odds with the family will remove them from the hospital in many cases. They'll just say, you're not authorized. It's only immediate family. And you know exactly what the person who's been seriously injured or who's going through a surgery or whatever, what they would want. They'd want their significant other there. But the family will exclude them. Unless you have something in writing, they don't even have to allow you to stay there. Where I see it more, and somebody once tried to call me on this, it's when if you're in a car accident, then first responders actually want to know who they can talk to. And it's not a bad idea to get direction. So for example, in Nevada, we have a hospital where you go with the county. It has a trauma unit, things like that. That's where they take people if they don't know who they, whether they're covered. That's just kind of like their knee-jerk reactions to take them there. But you don't really want to go to that particular hospital unless you've been stabbed or have a gunshot wound, if you know what I mean. Means they're bringing everybody down there. So you want to make sure that you're able to be directed to the hospital where either you have a doctor or you already know. What that would mean is that you want to have somebody who's there advocating for you, saying, this is what we want. Without a power of attorney, that's not going to happen. And in a setting where somebody's been in a car accident, you're not going to have it just sitting around on your person. So what I do is I say to my clients, on the health section, make copies of your healthcare power of attorney. A lot of states, it's either called a healthcare power of attorney or an advance directive. Make copies of it along with a HIPAA release and add in what we call living will, which is for end-of-life decisions. Fold them all up, put them in an envelope that says important medical documents, and put it in your glove box. And that way, if anything ever happens, you have those things there. If you are incapacitated, then more likely than not, a first responder, if they're trying to determine your identification, is going to go through purses and glove boxes to see what information they can find out. And if there's sitting right in front of them is a power of attorney and says, hey, if Toby's hurt, then I want Sandra to be able to make decisions, then that's who they'll be contacting. If has her medical information in there, they would just give her a call. And then instead of getting this call, hey, Mr. Mathis or Toby Mathis has been in a car accident, he's going to survive, we're taking him to the hospital, you get something generic. Now they know, because they have a HIPAA release, that they can actually disclose. what exactly has occurred. So you're not getting some half idea and getting freaked out. They can actually say, hey, he broke a leg and has a couple contusions and take him to the hospital to get him patched up. And immediately you can start acting on the individual's behalf. So in my case, I'd want someone advocating for me, which means don't take me down to the county hospital. Take me to one of the other hospitals. Get me someplace where I know some of the doctors or have a history. And so that gives them that ability. So that's a power of attorney. The next term is beneficiary. Now, beneficiary is usually in the context of a trust. So for our purposes, that's what we're going to call it. The beneficiary in a trust is the person who gets the right to receive the benefit of the property that's in the trust. So if you have a land trust, that's the person who can collect rents or occupy the premises. If you have a living trust, then a beneficiary is who gets the right to all the assets that are owned by the living trust. Who gets the income, who gets the, who has the right to even receive funds if it sells. That's the beneficiary. The grantor settlor is another matter. The grantor is who puts it together and who funds it. They're the ones that actually put the assets into the trust. Then you have the trustee. And by the way, because that's the person who puts it in, when the grantor passes, then it becomes an irrevocable trust. If you want to make it to where you can take things in and out, you let the grantor stay in control in some other fashion. Usually, either as a trustee or as a beneficiary. Trustee is who takes legal title on behalf of the trust for the benefit of the beneficiary. So the best example I can give you is if we're doing a land trust, I could put 123 Main Street into the land trust. If I am the trustee, then I am on legal title of the ABC. It's going to be A.T. Mathis, trustee on behalf of the 123 Main Street Trust. In other words, the trust can never own anything in its own name. It's almost like a little baby. You have to own it for the trust. It doesn't mean there's liability that comes along with it or anything like that. It just means that that's who they look at to manage the asset. Then they look and say, who's the beneficiary of that asset? And that's the trustee owes the duty to that beneficiary. So you always have the three. Use babies as a great example because the baby could never actually manage the asset. A beneficiary can't manage the asset. It's always got to be a trustee. What if your recommendation when primary beneficiary is special needs? We're going to go over that later on tonight. It's called special needs trust, and I'll go over some specific cases where a little bit of mistake in planning or lack of planning can cost a lot. So I'll go over that in a little bit. Revocable. What that means is it can be changed. So a lot of times when we put things together for people, you're putting things together for when you are the beneficiary, knowing that there's going to be future beneficiaries. Well, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know how the world's going to play out. We may have a small estate now and a large estate later. There's lots of things that could change. I could be married now, go through divorce, or somebody could pass away. Until you are no longer competent or you pass away, you can make changes. Even after you're incompetent, you could still give somebody the ability to make changes to your estate, although I wouldn't. Just because then they could change it and make themselves the beneficiary. So I tend to like these things where you have control. And then when you no longer have the capacity to change, then that's when things change a little bit for you. If you can't change it any longer, I don't really want somebody else to be able to walk in there and change it. So, but until you pass, it's not truly irrevocable. It could actually be changed. Unified credit, next one. And a unified credit is what we get from the federal government, that 4.45 million. It's about to go up to, I think it's 4.9 this next year, but it's 4.5 million right now. And what that means is I could give assets up to 5.45 million away when I pass, transfer them to beneficiaries, and my estate will not be taxed by the federal government. That does not mean that I won't have a state estate tax, or that your beneficiaries won't have an inheritance tax. There's about 14 states that have those types of taxes. What it means is that from a federal estate tax point, I don't have to worry about it. And these federal estate taxes get big quick. You're starting at 40%. So your unified credit is that for federal tax purposes. Put Fed tax. Then we have the unlimited marital deduction. So if you remember Tony Soprano from The Sopranos, James Gandolfini, when he passed, he had about a $70 million estate, I think was the gross value, and he gave his wife $20 million. Then he tried to give siblings the other $70 million, and it was subject to tax because he exceeded the unified credit. So 40% of 70 million is about 28 million. So he could have given the entire amount to his wife, used up the unlimited marital deduction. How much could he have given her? 70 million. How much could he have given her without triggering a tax? 70 million. So you don't want to just blindly ignore that. But on the same token, if you give your surviving spouse an asset without restriction, then they can do with it what they want. Again, the exception is creating a Q-tip in a living trust. A Q-tip locks down the asset, your asset. So if it's a husband and wife, then there's really 50% of the estate for husband, 50% for wife. So if husband predeceases wife, passes away, then husband's half would lock down. Wife could still be beneficiary. So wife has her half and still has access to the half of the deceased husband, but you put in provisions that say, hey, use yours first. And we already know where husband's is going to go. It's now irrevocable. So if it's going to the kids and it says this is who is getting it, it can't be given away by the surviving spouse. So best example I can give you is in my family. Great-grandfather comes over from Sweden. Great-grandma is from Norway. They had kids. Kids had kids, but long and short of it is one of the kids stayed with the grandparents. Grandma passes. Grandpa needs a caregiver. She watches over. She never married. When great-great-grandfather passes, everybody just kind of assumes, well, she'd always taken care of everything. She'd been the matriarch of the family. Just disclaim everything over to her. She gets the house and everything. Then we'll divvy it up when something happens to her. That'll be a long time from now. Well, she didn't have someone to take care of, so she went and found someone to take care of, getting married. And then she left everything to that gentleman by will. Meaning she passed away, and unbeknownst to everybody else, they never really thought about it. Since she predeceased her husband, he received everything. Then he passed away and left everything to his kids. What happened to that house and all the belongings inside of it that were supposed to stay in my family's realm, got transferred. So we ended up, my mom and my aunt, I remember, going out to the auction to buy the family albums. That's what happens with poor planning. The next one, annual gift exclusion. This is referring to an annual amount that you can give away without documenting to an individual, any individual. So I could give money to 10 different people. The cap is $14,000 per individual, but I can give $14,000. Same with the spouse. So you could give, in theory, husband and wife could give $28,000 away to multiple parties on an annual basis. So if you have great grandkids or grandkids or whatnot, or kids, and you want to start giving them assets and not have to file a gift tax return, believe it or not, the government wants to tax you when you give your money away. So if you want to give assets away, if you keep it below the threshold, then you don't have to file a single piece of paperwork. They just get it. Now, what's funny is when you start using entities, the fair market value gets devalued, meaning that if something is worth $100,000 in general, once you put it into a limited partnership or a limited or an LLC or even a corporation, the lack of marketability of that entity has to be factored in. Like, who wants to buy, 1/3 interest in a house that you have no control over? It devalues what people are willing to pay for that 1/3 interest. Well, it devalues it for gift tax, and it devalues it for estate tax too. It's not as good as it used to be, but there's still some great situations. The other realm that comes into is when people are creating something called an irrevocable life insurance trust, which means, generally speaking, if one spouse has that unlimited marital deduction of $5.45 million, both spouses have it. Now the federal law changed to allow you to do that automatically. It used to be you had to do it through a trust called an AB provision, but regardless, each spouse gets $5.45 million. It means you have about $11 million you can give, 10.9, that you can pass on without incurring the federal estate tax. What the irrevocable life insurance trust allows you to do is keep your life insurance from compounding that problem. So let's say that we have assets worth $11 million, plus we have another $1 million of life insurance. Well, that $1 million of life insurance is considered part of your estate. So the tax on that, just on the life insurance, would be about $400,000. It's pretty huge. So people use the gift exclusion to gift the premium of the life insurance so that it would not be part of that calculation. It would not be taxable. Long and short of it is people are able to keep their life insurance out of harm's way when it comes to the federal estate tax. It's actually a pretty big deal. The last, or second to last, next section is rule of perpetuities. Just to give you an idea, the rule of perpetuities is all interest must vest or fail within 21 years of a life and being. It is not malpractice to mess that up in many states. In California, that was the big case that came out in the 90s. You can goof up the rule of perpetuities, and it's not malpractice because it's so difficult to understand. In fact, most states have now run away from it. What it used to be is that you couldn't create people that we didn't know whether or not they really were going to be around. We want that trust to be forced to be distributed within that 21-year span of a set life of somebody who, the life and being means somebody who's alive right now. So if you have a great-grandson or something like that, well, it could be 21 years from that life and being. So you couldn't say, I want it to go to Ned 30 years after my grandson passes, or something along those lines. It has to be 21 years within that life or being. Most states, again, have gone away from it. There's very few that follow it still, just enough to make it annoying. What most states do is they put longer terms in. So they say, hey, we're not going to follow traditional life and being. We're going to make it 100 years, or in the case of Nevada, it's 365 years. In the case of Alaska, it's been abolished. Um, we tend to use jurisdictions that are most favorable to the privacy, and to the individuals who are operating and running and controlling the assets. So we tend to, I'll show you a little later. Nevada was ranked #1. There's a number of reasons for its trust laws, but we tend to go to jurisdictions where you have long periods of time. Now, because a trust is a contract, you can pick any state law to apply. So you could be sitting in California and you could still choose to have your trust governed by the laws of the state of Nevada or Delaware or Alaska, whatever. You can choose. And so we can get around with that. If you ever get hit with the rule of perpetuities, it's because you had a planner who didn't know what they were doing. There's so many ways around it now. You just have to be aware of it. All right, last section, guardianship. A lot of you guys have heard my stories. I was a court-appointed guardian. It just means that you're taking over control of somebody's person, their being. Some people call it a conservatorship, but realistically what it means is you're entrusted with their care to make sure that they have what they need to live. So guardianships are very interesting. I was a gal's guardian for 11 years. 11 years. During that 11 years, we had an interesting scenario. I probably told you about this, but I'll just repeat it. In this particular case, this was a gal who was pretty convinced that the hospitals would try to terminate her life if given the opportunity. So part of the power of attorney, going back up here, the healthcare, was that thing called the living will. Now, some of you guys may remember the Terry Schiavo case. There you go. Where state law kicks in if you don't have anything documented. Where the ex-husband, because she hadn't finalized her divorce, was given rights to dictate and to determine whether life was terminated. In this particular case, I became the power of attorney, and she requested that extraordinary measures be taken to preserve her life, and that the plug not be pulled. In her words, she says, "Don't let him kill me." And so, over those a little over a decade, I fielded many a situation involving her and the doctors, and on 3 of those occasions, they recommended terminating her life, meaning stop taking life-sustaining measures, let her go. And in all 3 cases, she ended up just being fine, coming back. So I always say, whenever I think I'm being paranoid, I always say, it's the reason they're being paranoid. But really, just guardianship just means you're acting on somebody else's behalf. Usually the state's involved if you're getting appointed as a guardian, or it's for minor children. If you don't put something in writing, then the state will railroad it, meaning that you may end up with your kids in foster care. So you always want to make sure that your kids have guardians that you've elected. So if you have issues with a sibling, make sure it's that you're being specific as to who gets to watch them and why, so you don't have the state coming in and trying to be helpful. You want to say, no, these are the people that I want to watch over my kids. Many a situation where somebody passes, and then here come the parents of the deceased trying to assert rights over their children, the children of the deceased. You want to be very specific. You want it to be, here's who I want to, who's going to raise my children the way that I would want to. Now, parents, you could probably say, hey, unless they were really horrible parents, you'd say that maybe that's okay. You want them involved. But, having your parents involved versus having them raise your children is 2 very different things, and it's up to you as to who you believe would be best to watch and raise your children. And then, because of the way we draft these things, most people who do living trusts it'd be the same situation. There would be money available to them through the trustee to receive funds to help raise your kids. So you're not just putting a big burden on them. That would be good. All right. So let's kind of go back. Let's go back to the very beginning, and then I'm going to go over 4 main principles. The very beginning is preserve, protect, and prosper. We have 3 areas that we're going to address in any plan with those ideas, preserve, protect, prosper, back of our heads. The number 1 area, which we talked about, I believe, in when we're talking about risks and protecting your treasures, is lawsuits. Here comes along somebody who has a law degree and the ability to justify, who, gosh, we just had another member of the Danny community get up close and personal with one of these, where they tapped into a car, and here comes this monster lawsuit a couple years later, asserting all sorts of funky stuff, and you're kind of like, this really happens. You sit there and explain to people, when they decide to target you, it's never good. But lawsuits, we want to make sure that we have a plan that addresses and minimizes the effect of a third party trying to take your money. Next area is taxes, making sure that we're being cognizant of our tax burden, and that we're doing everything we can as Americans, who we have as our largest expense taxes. It's 31%. So we want to have a plan to address it. And then the last area is death and disability, making sure that if something happens to you, that you are covered, so that you're not leaving a burden on other people, but you have something that addresses it. If you guys remember when I had Greg Boots on, a lot of these things, there's killing multiple birds with one stone. For example, Greg, who tends to be bullish, as am I, on certain types of financial products like IULs, unless you are dealing with an unscrupulous agent, you're going to have these benefits. You're going to have disability benefits, death benefits, and you're going to have tax-free distribution. Hold on, I see another question that just popped up. You have all these things, and quite often they can be handled, almost all of them. Like I used to say, that lawsuits, your cash value is protected, your taxes, hey, we're able to access that money. And then here we have funds in the event that I'm disabled. I actually have living benefits by just having access, just by having insurance. And then if I pass, yes, it dumps a bunch of money. I'll show you how that works. But we're looking at all 3 all the time. Someone just asked, mandatory process for special ed kids when they turn 18 in terms of guardianship, being responsible on their behalf. So it does. It gets pretty interesting when you get into special eds. When somebody's deemed incompetent, then you want to have somebody designated to take care of them or act as their representative. You guys may hear some Christmas music in the back. I'm actually in an office building that is in the middle of a huge outdoor mall. For those of you who've been out here, it's pretty cool. But they do their Christmas parade every night, so they're blaring the music outside. So I may start singing along. Anyway, I'll tell them all to turn it down. Turn down your parade. Going back to special ed kids. So here's a couple of the problems that you have. If you have children, and especially under the age of 18, quite often there are state programs that'll kick in and assist. If they become beneficiaries underneath a trust that does not have special provisions in it, we call them credit shelter provisions or special needs provisions, it will, the state could actually come in and sing it. James, you sing it. They'll actually step in and take what they've actually paid out. And so there's cases, probably the worst I saw was in Pennsylvania, where they never even let the parents know of what was going on. That the state seemed like it was offering this service, but they were keeping track of how much had been paid out. And then the grandparents thought that they were going to do a good thing and leave the individual who had special needs a piece of their estate. Instead of just giving it to the parents or keeping it in trust, they decided to give it to this individual, and the state of Pennsylvania stepped in and took it. They said, hey, we've been providing all these benefits, and this was literally a situation where you could not be the beneficiary until you're 18. You're considered incapacitated until that time, and then they just stepped on in as soon as they hit 18 and said, fantastic, thank you for leaving this for us. And so what you do is you put it in trust. You're going to hear me saying that a lot because this is the only way to do it. If you leave it up to a court, they'll just distribute it to a party, and if the state has a claim, boom, it's gone. If you leave it in a trust, then we can put provisions to the trustee saying don't distribute assets if it's going to go to a third party. So that third party, just think of all the third parties it could be. For special needs, it could be service providers, medical providers, anybody that provided any benefit for that individual. And you may have thought that it was complimentary or that it was a service, but there may be a redemption right against it, against that individual, saying, hey, if you ever get money, we could just come in and take it and claim it. So now you're giving the trustee the ability to say, hey, I'm not going to pay it to a third party. Can I pay this to you? The other thing that comes in is if there is government assistance, you don't want to cause it to be denied going forward. So it's the same things. You want to make sure that you have provisions that say to a trustee, don't distribute this asset to this beneficiary. If in so doing, you're going to cancel out benefits. So, don't withhold it if it would be better, like you use your brain. But if they're receiving government benefits, don't just give the money over to them if it's just going to be taken away. Or if somebody's stepping in saying, hey, great, when you distribute money, give it to me, don't just give them the money. In any trust, once it becomes irrevocable, especially, you can have provisions that are called credit shelter provisions that say to a trustee, don't distribute this to the beneficiary's creditors, ex-spouse, any third party, government body, anything like that. And then we can ramp it up one step further and say, hey, if somebody's deemed incapacitated, and this is where these same provisions work when somebody's incapacitated from drugs and alcohol, etc. So I put them copiously into our documents simply because I want to allow the trustee to exercise a lot of influence on your behalf, meaning like, hey, use your brain. I don't want to hamstring them and say you have to distribute this money out, because if you're having to distribute money out to a drug addict, you may as well just, it's not going to be a good situation. When we first started, one of the areas that I said we're going to be talking about is doing the right thing. I used the example of my client that suffered serious bodily harm and closed head injuries. He was run over on a motorcycle and had multiple overdoses during the pendency of trying to get him recovery. And then when the money was finally located and we were able to put our hands on it, my biggest concern was handing it over to him because I figured he would just kill himself. And so then it was being very deliberate about how the monies get doled out and making sure there was a third party who was standing there kind of watching over the situation, making sure that, he didn't, it's not exercising undue amount of control. It's just doing what's right, you don't want to just give your kids money because you made it and you feel really good about giving them a bunch of money. You may make them into something that you're not proud of or that they're not proud of. You may take away some of their drive. Michael Bowman, one of my partners, who just this week had a baby, went to school with a kid whose parents passed while he was in college, and he was going to go to law school, but he took the money and traveled when after his parents passed because he had all this money and he was going to go to law school. Hey, thanks, Mickey. I'll let him know. It was really bad. It was last weekend we were teaching a large, pretty big event, and Michael was supposed to be teaching a portion of it with me. And so the day that he was supposed to be teaching, he called me up and said, "My wife's water broke." So I said, "All right, I'll cover it." I said, "If you didn't want to speak, you could have just said so. You didn't have to make your wife give birth." But and then the first picture we put up in front of the screen was Michael's baby, but somebody put my other partner Clint's head on it. I don't know if they thought it was funny. I did. Anyway, we always goof on each other, but it's Michael's first baby. Anyway, keep moving on. Keep moving on. We'll just we'll just jump off from there. We'll get back into the special needs provisions because we'll have to. It's definitely an area that we want to address. We don't want to give somebody money that'll change their lifestyle so that they will not be able to recover. Michael's friend's situation, he had the money, they went and traveled, but they never went back to school because once they had a good time for about 2 years and then the money ran out. And now they're not in a position to be able to go back to school any longer. They've gotten out of it. They got out of the rhythm of it. One of the worst things you could do to a college kid or to somebody that you want to have be motivated is dump a bunch of cash on them without being there to instruct them on what it means and the proper use of money. I always say money will make you more of what you already are, and if you're young and immature, it'll really bring that out. And so you have to have somebody there that's that has some wisdom that can guide them. All right, next area. We always go back to our risk analyzer. This is where we start. We have something called the Anderson system, where we go through 5 steps every year with our clients. This is always the big one, is where you have the personal realm. This is you and your family. Your car is, maybe you have more than one. Your house, and maybe your retirement plans like an IRA, something like that. That lives over in your personal realm. When we're really talking about a dynasty, this is a critical area because you're going to realize that with you, you're the fuel for a lot of things. Your salary, your ability to work, your ability to be, put things in play, that can end up really changing the dynamic of a plan. Just your life right there can change the dynamic of a plan, and I'll show you how that works. I'll do a little comparison. I think I drew one up, yeah. So of whose estate is worth more, and you'll be surprised at the answer when we get to the end. No risk assets are things like stocks, bonds, cash. These are things that don't create risk for the person who owns it. Let me see if I can draw. The active realm is this is an active business. That's a horrible color. Let's see what's a good color. I'll just do black. There we go. So that's your active business. That could be an MLM. That could be consulting, management company, whatever. That's your active sweat of your brow small business. So this would normally be a Schedule C. We like to put boxes around that. And then your risk assets, that's rental real estate. And I'm just going to put rental. Okay, and we would also be putting a box around that, making sure that somebody can't take that away at some point in the future. When we really start talking about a dynasty, we have to start here, because in order to address your mortality, what we're really doing is saying, hey, we're only controlling that personal realm. If we box everything else up, it doesn't die. The only thing that we're taking is who was ever in control of these boxes. And I like to think of them as being put inside of a luggage compartment. So if I have 1, 2, 3 areas, I have them in a suitcase. I just have 1, 2, and 3 in a suitcase. This is the suitcase over here. I'll put a handle on it, and that's where you put together your estate plan, usually in the form of a living trust. And then if something happens to you, you're just giving somebody else access to your suitcase. Hey, if I trip and I can't carry my suitcase, here's somebody else to carry it. If I pass away, here's who you give the suitcase to. And periodically we open up the suitcase, take things out, and distribute them to people that we name. It may be a class, like my descendants, blood of my blood. And we're not talking about stepkids or ex-wives or anything like that. We're talking about your children or your adopted children. And that's who gets my estate. And I don't have to give them all the assets. I could just say, you have access to what's in the suitcase. So we'll go over that some more before we're done tonight. But really all you're doing is you're creating something that is of use to somebody rather than just giving it to them. So it's kind of like what's more important is if I gave somebody just a unlimited dollar amount to buy a car, they may make a really bad decision, as opposed to if I just made a car available to them. I could choose the car, or I could have somebody reasonable choose the vehicle. At the end of the day, I just want them to have, reasonable transportation. I don't want them to make a mistake. And I can allow somebody else to make that call until they're old enough and can do it themselves. Or I could just say, hey, I'll always have a third party there that's kind of a check and balance. All right, we're going to go over 4 big principles. The first principle is this idea that you're taxed on the transfer of assets. So if you buy stock in Microsoft and you never sell it, do you have to pay tax on Microsoft on the gains? Say I bought Microsoft at $1, and over my life it goes up to $100. So we'll just say this: we buy Microsoft at $1, and over my lifetime it goes up to $100. Do I have any tax on that when I die? Or any time during my life? Who thinks that there's a tax? Who doesn't think there's a tax? Just respond in the little Q&A. I want to see who thinks there's a tax versus who doesn't think there's a tax. There's always a tax. Not until it's cashed out. You betcha. No tax. About 50-50. So here's the thing. No tax on gain on death. This is a big difference between us and the Canadians. So you have to sell it. And what happens when you die is the basis goes from $100 from $1 to $100. So if your kids or whoever you leave it to sell it upon your passing, there's 0 capital gains. During your lifetime, you are not taxed on it as it goes up in value. The only potential tax is the federal estate tax or a state estate tax, meaning the value of your estate. But if we don't even, we're not going to have a tax on the sale of it if we sell it after we pass. It's just the value may trigger a tax, and there's always some things we can do in that sense. But if you're underneath the $5 million or 5.45 as a single person, or underneath $11 million as a married couple, there's not going to be any tax on it. It's taxable when you sell it. So here's something we do see. It's on this on death, is you'll see somebody with a huge increase like that, they will sell it before they pass, and then they'll think, I'm going to give some of the money away as a gift. So if the tax is on transfer, is when I sell it, the thing I want to do is keep from selling it, if I can avoid it. So I don't want to sell it when I'm 90 and pay $99 capital gains and then transfer it to somebody else, where I now may even be triggering a gift tax. So if it's over $14,000, I do have a $5 million gift tax exclusion in my lifetime, but I have to file a tax form. Here's a less likely example. A lot of you guys like to give money to charity. Some people would be tempted to sell this stock. I sell the Microsoft, and I have $99 of gain. Depending on what your tax bracket is, that could be 20% plus state income tax. If you're in California, that could be, closer to 30%. Let's just say it's 20%, so I'm going to pay, $19. What is it, $19.50 or something like that. I'm going to have $80 left, and then I'm going to give that to charity, so I'll get an $80 deduction. That's no good. We don't want to do that. What's the better route is just to get used to giving the actual asset, the $100, and you give that to the charity. You actually give the stock, and then they have no capital gains at all. So if I gave the 100, I get a deduction for 100 as a charitable deduction. I have no tax, and the charity gets the money, and they don't have to pay tax when they sell it. So, that's the thing, is when you look and say, when are taxes imposed, it's always going to be on this little thing called transfer. And I transfer by selling. If certain things expire, like if I have an option that expires, but it's transferring it. So if I had that option, then it expired, it just went away from me. So that's where the taxable event could be. If I buy something and then I sell it, it's when I sell it that it's triggering the tax. It's not during the holding period. That's the big thing. So those of you guys who are saying, hey, it's taxed, no way, we can avoid it. And that's true on any appreciating asset. So if I have real estate, let's say that I just had one of my guys talking to me about it. His first house was in Long Beach. He paid $17,000 for it. It's worth a little over $1 million now. Long Beach, California. He doesn't own it anymore. He was griping over why you never sell real estate. So let's just say that you bought that $17,000, now it's worth $1 million. And then you pass. That 17 becomes $1 million. It steps up its basis. So somebody could actually sell that and pay zero in capital gains. So we're always looking at the transfer. In real estate, it gets even more interesting because we have something called a 1031 exchange. And so, same situation. You have a $17,000 basis. It's now worth $1 million. And you 1031 exchange it. Then you pay zero in gain so long as that $1 million is reinvested in real estate. These are the things you look at. You just say, hey, we know there's going to be a tax on transfer, so then we look at the exceptions. And so principle number one is always the tax is on transfers, not on holding. Last portion of that, and this is what I drew up at Dynasty. Let's see if I can make this go away. But the idea is that when you don't get rid of something, assets grow geometrically. So if this is time, this is value, going that direction. So it's worth lots of money the longer you can hold it. What we literally do to ourselves is require the sale at certain instances. When we die is a big one. And that's when you end up resetting yourself back here, because there's always a transaction cost to selling. It's not just tax. Tax is a huge one. But even if there's not tax, you still have closing costs, you still have commissions or whatever. I was just talking to somebody who had a portfolio, a stock portfolio, and they were talking to their financial advisor about liquidating it, and the financial advisor started talking about all the penalties that were going to be charged on that account if you liquidated it. In other words, they tricked them. You go into the circus and you think it's free, and then you have to pay to leave. It's like there's some trickery involved, and that's usually when somebody forces you to do a transfer on something occurring. So if you transfer control away to somebody, there could be a tax on it. If you have gain, there could be a tax on it. All those things. And so then we want to address it. We want to know what kind of tax and what kind of transfer triggers it. And then what are the exceptions so that we can get away from having these forced sales. Quite often when you have forced sales in an estate planning setting, it's to pay expenses. You have to pay the lawyer, you have to pay the tax, if there might be some, maybe some inheritance tax, all those things, and then they justify the selling of it. There's been a couple of NFL stadiums that were for sale, which means somebody had, somebody had to sell an asset to try to settle a debt. And that was the excuse for having to sell the asset. Whereas if they hadn't sold the asset, well, you know what NFL stadiums are worth now. It's ridiculous. It's like these things keep going up. You're just pushing it back here and having them start all over again after all the costs and all the transaction costs and taxes, and they have to start over again. They never get over here. And that's what we want. So one of the big principles in building a dynasty is avoiding that tax on transfer. So if there was one idea that I could give you, it's taking away the ability of someone to harm themselves. So when we do a dynasty, it's keeping the assets together, and specifically cash flow assets. We don't care about the value of cash flow assets. We care about the money that they generate. In true cash flow assets, the money doesn't stop. It just keeps generating. The whole idea is if you buy a piece of real estate, it doesn't go away. It keeps paying you year after year. You may have to do an upkeep once in a while, but it just keeps going on. So it's a cash flow asset. Other things like personal property, we're not too worried about that. What we're really talking about is don't allow someone to disassemble what you put in place for them. Because if you do so, you lose the benefit of that geometric curve. You need to have that thing spend a lot of time getting valuable. You don't want them to ruin it for themselves. Do not die. Principle number 2, do not die. There's nothing we can do about that. You're mortal. Sorry. We all come with an expiration date. We don't know when it's going to be, but it's definitely there. But we can create boxes called corps, LLCs, and trusts that do not die. You can have them go on for years and years and years and years and years and years, hundreds of years, corps and LLCs per infinity as it sits right now, even trusts. And we could put these corps and these LLCs inside the trusts, which again, I just look at, that's like a suitcase. And, all we're doing is if something happens to us, we have somebody else designated to continue to carry on that document. So we have the corporations and everything. In other words, nothing is forced to be sold, distributed, liquidated. There's nothing that has to be done. These things continue on. The only thing that changed was who's carrying the suitcase and who gets access to its insides. So so that's another very good principle, is do not die. Since we know that you are going to pass, though, there is something that you can do, and that's, you can say there's a 100% likelihood that you're going to pass, and you can buy something that pays money with 100% likelihood when that occurs, and then that can put money into here, and we're going to talk about that. That's why I'm a big fan of permanent life insurance. I know I'm going to die, so I want benefit during my lifetime from this thing. But I also know that when I die, there's going to be a bunch of money that dumps into my estate. that are going to allow some of my wishes to be put into effect. A lot more cash than I have right now. I'm always putting my cash into cash flow assets. So I have great cash flow. So use some of that cash flow to buy something that will dump a bunch of cash in there. That'll continue to allow things to grow and operate. I'll show you, again, I'm going to compare 3 estates and see which one you think is more valuable. Which one had more money during their lifetime versus which one's going to be able to create a dynasty when they pass, and you might be shocked. All right. Number 3, it's about control, not ownership. Ownership, let's say that I have a box, and it's an LLC, and I'm giving interests away. Let's say I have it in trust for my kids, or I create an irrevocable trust, something along those lines. And I have a management company, and then there's me. And I have a piece. What if I'm only, let's say, 40%, and everybody else adds up 60%? Am I out of control? Did I give away the whole asset? The answer might surprise you. The answer is no. I could still control that with as little as, some cases 1 or 2%. Usually we put in something called a supermajority, cannot change the manager, supermajority being 85% or greater. So with 15%, I could still control all the funds and still have a tremendous amount of access over it. So it's not about owning something, it's about being able to control it. The other principle is, I don't care if it's not in my name. Even if I own 100% of an entity through my estate plan, let's say that I have an LLC, I'm not going to get bent out of shape if I have a whole bunch of cash in an LLC that's not in my personal name. I'll have that LLC owned by a living trust, and I still have access to it. I still have 100% of control over it. But for legal purposes, I don't own it anymore. LLC does. Or if I use not a living trust, but let's say that I own land through a land trust, I don't own it anymore. Land trust does. I may even be the name on it on behalf of the land trust. It may be A.T. Mathis 123 Main Street Trust. But me personally, A.T. Mathis, I no longer own that as an individual anymore. It's now owned in the name of a trust. And if something happens to me, we don't need a judge to transfer that asset. It's not owned by me. It's owned by the trust. We look at the trust, and it dictates who gets what and when. So it's a tremendous tool to make sure that assets don't get taken away. Then the last principle is financial stewardship. Looking over something, you've been entrusted with something, is looking over these assets almost like they're crops, and you're the farmer. You have a little there's me. Maybe what's that American thing? That looks horrible. That's a pitchfork. Maybe you don't have a pitchfork. Maybe you're just a farmer with a green thumb. Just go like that. Hey, I'm a green thumb. And you're watching over those crops. And so the whole idea is to water them. Put a little water them and allow them to continue to grow. So maybe you box them up so that somebody can't harm them, and then your job is just to control. If that's the case, then we can always set things up to, if something bad happens, that more dumps in. And then if I can't do it, I want to make sure that I have somebody else designated who's a good farmer who can still watch over things. So if I can't do it, then somebody else steps in. So principle number 4 is about financial stewardship, making sure that we're not just giving somebody a whole bunch of, cash without having somebody that can care for it or teach them how to handle it. making sure that we're not just giving an asset to somebody that's going to create a problem, but we're being very deliberate, saying, hey, this is something that's going to continue to escalate and grow for many years. I put the plan in place. I don't want it disappearing. So again, going back in, what we're really talking about is right over here in the personal realm, car, the no risk assets, risk assets being the real estate. All of this stuff blends well together. You know, we're talking about is how do we make it go and work to the benefit of those we care about. So if we are leaving behind folks, or even if we're not leaving behind people, a lot of people would want to leave behind an organization. Then you're setting something up that can continue to fund them. And the worst thing you could do for some of these organizations is just give them unfettered cash. You may want it to be income. So what's that? That is our living trust. Put another way, that's your estate plan. And we want to put things in it. We now know that we may be putting boxes like our LLCs, corps, house, car, all sorts of things go in there. What types of things would you put in? And so I'm going to ask you guys this. This is going to be interactive, so I need you guys to really use that Q&A section, because I want to know what kind of ideas, what kind of things we're going to put in to our estate. So if we're going to inventory estate, maybe you just do your own and just start listing them out. So what's in your estate? Obviously we have cars, house, oops, it's a horribly written house. Yeah. Let's see. Would we put real estate directly in there? Let's say this is single family residences. Somebody says a plane, corp, LLC. Yeah, don't put the real estate directly in there. Put it in there in a box so it can't mess everything else up. Jewelry. IRAs. Yeah. What else do we have? How about some family heirlooms? So there was a great case out of Georgia over a plastic Tweety bird. Putty tat Tweety bird, less than $4. Kids were going at it in court. By the way, can you take that away from them? So do you guys think you can take away the ability of the kids to fight? Yeah, you just disinherit them if they contest. They can contest the form of the trust. In other words, they could contest how it's being interpreted, perhaps. Hey, when they say, you know, the retirement plans, this is what they're really meaning. What you can do is put in there that they'll be disinherited if they contest. And yeah, it absolutely works. It's a contract. It's like any other contract, though. It works if you enforce it. And so it really comes down to who the trustee is and whether or not, like if somebody's suing to get a particular asset, then the estate could say, you know, you're out, you're contesting the substance of this document. If there's a good faith, like there's a question about, you know, hey, it says my mom's wedding ring and I'm not getting that. Yeah, I can absolutely go after the estate and say this is what you're supposed to do. If I'm just like, hey, I want to get more, or I'm contesting whether this was a valid living trust, you're gone. I'm sorry, but you're out. The trustee just nixes you. And yeah, it does. It actually does work just like that. Um, where you have issues is when you have poorly drafted documents that really, um, in April, I'm going to come over some of your issues. We'll go over some of these about supervised payments and things like that. And yeah, you can do all that. Um, Sometimes you have trusts that are drafted, somebody that takes a will and kind of tries to adjust it, or it's just a poorly drafted document. It doesn't really, it's really not what they're purporting it to be. That's when you have issues. And also when you have issues is when you're distributing all the assets. You're giving them an incentive. So what I would suggest to people is that you quit thinking about distributing the asset and start thinking about preserving the asset for future generations, but making it accessible. So going back to the example of the piece of luggage, I don't want to give and just open up the luggage and say, hey, I have a free-for-all inside there. What I want is to designate somebody else to handle the luggage and continue to allow it to be used for the benefit of who I want to benefit from it. If that's your kids, it's great. Your descendants, so that means your kids, your kids' kids, your kids' kids' kids, your kids' kids, kids' kids' kids, like all that. You just have it keep running on, but it's a fixed sum of money that's sitting in that bag that's being used for their benefit. And yeah, you're carrying on your vision. Some people actually take it a step further, and they don't want the money to go to the kids without the kids having to do something. And so they'll actually have the money go into a memorial foundation. So, for example, I could leave my entire estate to the A.T. Mathis Memorial Foundation that doesn't even exist yet. I could simply instruct my trustee that should I pass and this isn't created, to have it created, and then to fund it with the entirety of my estate. And then I could say any of my descendants have the option to serve on the board and get paid a reasonable salary. And then I could list out, here are the things that are really important to me. I would like to make it where my beneficiary got supervised payments. And in order to get those payments, assets had to attend Danny so many times a year. Yeah, you can do that. Because this is the contract. All you're doing is you're telling the trustee, hey, trustee, before you distribute any funds, here's the requirements for a beneficiary. And it could be that they go to the Danny events or an equivalent, functional equivalent, if Danny's no longer available. So think in terms of 100 years from now. It would have to be something similar or equivalent to it, or a successor in interest, assuming that Danny's no longer with us and doesn't live to 150 years old. Supervised payments, you also put in provisions that say, and I'll go over some of these in a little bit. Let's see, I'm just going to take a peek. I think I do go over it. Yes, I do. A little bit later on. We'll go over some of the language that we use in the trust, so that you're covering health, maintenance, education, and support. You're not just giving them the cash, but you're saying, here's things for you to go to school, to make sure you have a roof over your head, to make sure that you have health coverage if you need money if you get, like for example, if they had a surgical need or something, you would have money there for that. But they couldn't just walk up and say, hey, I want to buy a Ferrari, give me the money. No, it's for specific reasons, health, maintenance, education, and support, and I have to look at what you make before determining whether you're eligible to receive any distribution. And then some of you guys may be thinking, oh man, who's going to make those decisions? There are professionals that this is what they do for a living. There's trust companies, and there's just about every banking institution has a trust company. They usually get paid about 1% a year of the value of the assets. So if you leave a decent chunk of assets behind, they'll handle everything for you and do the distributions. If you want to keep it in with people you know, then you list them out. Just keep in mind that after a set amount of time, inevitably you're going to run out of people who can act as trustee, because they'll pass, or it'll be just too long a period. They will be unable to. So it's always best to leave a naming convention or a company. So quite often what I'll do is I'll have individuals listed, and then I'll put or a fiduciary thereafter. And a fiduciary just means, I would say, like a licensed attorney, an accountant, or a bank or a fiduciary. Somebody who has E&O coverage or liability coverage. You can sue. In some cases, if you're using, you could say, a trust company, and they're bonded, so that people would be able to, get the money. This last week in Nevada, we had a probate lawyer abscond with about $13 million of his client funds. You want to have somebody that is licensed and has somebody else backing it up. It's like the Bar Association, lawyers, all these companies. Even though this guy is a thief, everybody's stepping up to make sure that you don't lose the faith in that community. You don't want it just to be Joe Schmo down, or just, some beneficiary in the future who may say, hey, I was gonna honor all these conditions, and they just take all the money. So you want to have it be a third party who can be sued. Okay, I want to make sure, to the best of my ability, they maintain good character and good things coming out of them. Yeah, absolutely. So you can put in, done this a long time, and I've done just about every provision you can think of. Some people say they have to be an active member of a church, or they have to continually tithe. I have one person who said they need to be outside the country, the United States, at least 3 weeks a year in order to be eligible to continue to be a dependent or a beneficiary. So you're saying, here's the things that I think would be the earmarks if somebody's doing things right. Now, you can get a little crazy on this too. Some people just say, hey, if they need the money, it's there. Other people say, outside of, if they're dependent on drugs or alcohol, your trustee has the ability to put the brakes on. Your trustee always has the ability to no longer give them the cash directly. They could pay for things for them. So, for example, if somebody's shown issues with drugs or alcohol, it's very unlikely that a trustee is going to pay them money directly. They will probably pay for things for them. So, for example, if somebody had an alcohol issue, they may pay for rent directly. Hey, you need a place to live. Here's this. Or they may pay the lease on a vehicle directly, but they're not going to give cash to the individual that they're concerned won't use it for good things. All right, let's keep going through. I think I showed this to you guys while we were at Dynasty. This is the AAA report on probate in 1989 and 1990. Pretty straightforward. The recommendation from AARP was that attorneys should disclose the estimated cost of eventual probate proceedings when they're drafting up wills. So you can compare apples to apples as opposed to apples and oranges. A will, quite often these folks will put them together for $199, and you're thinking, wow, you did me a huge favor. And what they're really doing is it's a loss leader for them. They're just putting it in their stable so that when people die, and it's about 15% mortality rate depending on where you're at, you may have a situation where you're working with a section of the company where statistically speaking, you'll probate 1.5 out of every 10 within a year. So you're saying, hey, I'll go ahead and do the $199 will, knowing that I'm going to have unfettered legal fees at some point in the future. But people do that. AAA said, hey, it's costing about 20% of small estates. It's not a small amount of money, and when you're talking about a small estate, let's say it's a $50,000 estate, that's the gross value. We're talking about $10,000. Makes no sense not to put together a trust. I mean, these things are absolutely no-brainers when you start looking at stats and just having the experience. The last thing you want to do in an emotional situation with money involved is put lawyers in the mix. It's rarely a good thing. Why is it so expensive? Well, because you have to file a petition. This is probate again. You have to file a petition in court and give notice to heirs and beneficiaries. So you're basically hitting the hornet's nest. You have to do an appraiser. You have to give notice to creditors and inventory. You have to put together an inventory. We're not talking about like a small list. We're talking about all the assets. You have the estate, funeral expenses, debts, and taxes. You're going to have some of that stuff regardless of whether you're using a trust or a will. There's no way to get away some of the expenses, the funeral expenses, for example. If you're in court, you're going to have to get permission to transfer the assets. Then you have to transfer all the assets. So, you prove the will. Here's all the creditors. I've given notice to them. Now, they've had their statutory period of time to make claims against the estate. And I want the permission to transfer things. Then the court signs off and says, you can transfer all the assets. You transfer all the assets out of the probate, out of the estate, and then you close the estate. So that whole process here, on average, you're looking at about 18 months. And before you think, oh, it's really easy, if you have any real estate, you're probating in each state which the real estate is located. My grandma had a double wide in Florida and a lot in Alabama. And it was cheaper just to abandon them than deal with the attorneys and all the rigmarole. It gets expensive. There would have been a probate in Florida and in Alabama. All of it could have been avoided with a simple trust. Then it would have been easy. So how do you create a dynasty? So kind of go back and say, well, everybody starts off with themselves. We have a human being, we have a body. Then you have your work, your assets, and your stuff. And so you have to say, how do I go from here to creating something that's going to, it's basically, I'd call it perpetual wealth. It creates something that doesn't go away. You could actually have a dynasty created that will go on for hundreds of years simply by seeding it to where you have some assets that pay off a dollar amount every year, and then these assets continue to go up in value. The dollar amount also continues to go up. So if you have like real estate, you don't want to sell the real estate. You just hold the real estate. It's probably going to appreciate, but it's going to keep paying out rents every year. And those rents distribute to your beneficiaries. The assets will continue to grow over the years because they're not being spent down. Somebody's not just liquidating them and going on a shopping spree or traveling the world. You just have the assets and they're kicking it out. Where it really boils down to is when you look at the buckets. Here's your cash. This is easy to spend. You can give some of it away. Not much of that ever ends up going to heirs. There's very little of this, statistically speaking, very little of this that goes to heirs. Then you have your tax deferred realm. This is like your IRA, your 401k. This is the one that's great as you're alive and you're accumulating, and then at about 70 and a half it becomes not so great. It starts forcing you distributions. When somebody passes, there's still a tax. You have an IRA, a traditional IRA. It's not just because somebody passes that all of a sudden it's not a tax implication anymore. No, you just have distributions that start coming down and paying out to a new beneficiary over their life based on maybe on the decedent's life or a term of years. And then it's still taxable when that person receives it. The last realm is the tax-free realm. And this is where certain types of real estate, IULs live. And where this really gets good is that usually when you're looking at kind of the gain, this is how things grow. Even real estate and all, financial, you're talking about single digit difference in rate of return. Good, you're in the stock market compared to the real estate. You're not having huge differences. They're both looking at about a 7% annual return. The big difference is, depending on the type of product you purchase, as to whether your heirs get a big chunk of change. So in this case, I'm just using an example, a 35-year-old person who's putting $5,000 a year away. And then at the end of that year, what it's worth. The reason that we did 7,807 isn't because that's how much they put in. They put in 5, but they got a tax deduction by putting in the 5. That, with the gain over the year, has them doing pretty well. But nobody gives it to the heirs like when you're using a life product. We know for certain you're going to pass. We know that you may have some desires. So let's just say we're looking at how do we have our dynasty, that we want to create, let's just say it's $1 million in an account for the benefit of a split between my charity and my kids, some percentage to charity, some percentage to kids. Oops. So I know I'm going to have a bucket of cashola that's dealing this out. And I'll have to have somebody that can dole it out. The problem is what if I don't make a ton of money? I'm like, oh man, I'm working really hard. I'm going to have some sweat going there. And I'm making $75,000 a year. How will I be able to, and I'm working hard, boy, I'm tired. Hey, I'm working too hard. Well, that's where this stuff comes into play. This is 35%. This is $5,000 per year. Multiply these figures upward if you're putting more. Say you live to 85. You'd still have, in addition to your house and your other inventory, you'd still have an additional death benefit of $363,000. That's a good chunk of change to start something. If you don't think that's enough, you can increase the death benefit. If you think that's too much, you will borrow out as much out of the policy. But you're never without options. So we had our 3 buckets. The first bucket's the cash, second bucket's the IRA, then the IUL. We still do 3 buckets. We're going to split it up amongst them, but again, the most bang for the buck is clearly within the IUL. In the first 10, 20 years, you have more cash than these guys. This is always, when you're dealing with an IRA, there's always a tax hit. So that's more accurate. So realistically, you're comparing these 3 numbers for access to immediate cash. Clearly the cash, the ETF bucket number 1. Doesn't mean that's all you're going to do, though. Just means that you have options here, guys. And the one thing I know for certain is we all have a body. So regardless of what you're making, I know for certain that we can use bucket number 3 with everybody. Some of you guys, we want to use 2 and 1, but maybe you're using your cash to pay off debt. Now, I told you I would go over some examples. So let's go over a couple of examples. These are good ones. So I'm going to give you 3 scenarios. Scenario number 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to ask you, from creating a dynasty, which one you think is best. Just gut reaction. Once I set these out, then I'll just say vote. Just put 1, 2, or 3. So number 1, makes money all the way up until they're passed away. They have income, so they're able to live off of it. So they have income for life, but they have nothing put in savings. They own a $300,000 house outright. No debt. and they have life insurance with a death benefit of $500,000. That's what they have. Then they have some personal stuff, personal property, cars. Let's just say jewelry, things about $30,000 worth. Person number 2 has a $500,000 home, also paid off. They have a bunch of real estate worth $200,000. You could either say that they own it outright or that that's how much equity they have. And they have a $100,000 left when they pass in an IRA, meaning they've been living off it, but there's about $100,000 left. And then they have the same amount of personal property. Actually, we'll give them more jewelry, so we'll say they have $50,000 in personal property. Person number 3 scrapes by. No savings. Rents home. Has personal property. Worth $10,000 and a $1 million life insurance policy. They've managed to put some cash value in it, but we'll just say there isn't really anything left. Did I make $1 million? We'll add one more zero. Here, let me write that better. I'll just make it really simple. 1 million life insurance. All right. Which one has the boxes? We'll ignore the boxes for right now. Which one, from an estate standpoint, is going to be worth the most? If we're creating something for those people after, which one's going to be worth the most? What this means is the day they pass. So I'm seeing a lot of 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 3, 3, 2, 1. We're getting them all over the place. 2, 2, 3. I should have done this as a poll so we could have had some fun. 3, 3, 3, 3. What we care about is, when we're talking about leaving a dynasty, what are we leaving behind? This is how easy it is. Who is struggling the most? 3 looks like they're having a hard time. They don't even own their house. But as far as seed created for a dynasty, this is how it works. So let's go through 1. Income we don't care about. $300,000 house, fantastic. No debt, and $500,000 of life insurance, which by now you guys should know is tax-free. The house is also tax-free, personal property, tax-free. So the total value that they're passing on to their kids or for their dynasty is $830,000. Not bad. Number 2, $500,000 house, again, steps up in basis, no tax. Then you have real estate, $200,000, also steps up in basis. The $100,000 IRA is taxable. And the personal property, $50,000, is not. So we have 500, 200, 50. I'm just going to say that average 30% tax. So we'll just lower that down to $70,000. So add all those up. 500, 200, 270, so what is that? 770, so 820,000. Not bad. Somebody says cost to sell real estate. Okay. So there, we'd have to adjust that by about 10%. So let's just say it's 10%. It's 200,000 and it costs us to sell it. There's no tax, so then we'll just lower this. I'll just say 10% to sell. I've sold tons of real estate. That's about right. So we're looking at about 800,000. Then we go down to number 3. Scrapes by. We don't care about that. There's no savings. There's nothing to give. Rents home. Nothing to give there. So there's these 2 items. They managed to pay into a policy. What are they leaving behind? 1,000,010, a little over $1 million. So it seems to me that number 3 outperformed even number 1 by about double, a little bit more than number 2. But they created some pretty good seed. Interesting. And there are no taxes on life insurance. The only tax you'd have to worry about is if this amount right here, the $1 million, the total value of the estate was in excess right now of 5.45 million. But with life insurance, we can always remove it from the estate early by putting in an irrevocable life insurance trust. So my experience is that unless there's bad planning, life insurance is almost impossible to make into a taxable event. Yeah, so you can always get life insurance proceeds, both the value of it, but the receiving it is never taxable. That's what's cool about it. There's cash value of it and things like that too, but I just wanted to give you guys, I expected that there'd be some people that thought maybe 1 or 2. It was really 1, 2, and 3. You guys were pretty much even on it, but that just kind of shows me things are not always as they seem. You always got to get your pen out and do the old calculate, and then things are usually pretty obvious once you do that. And to be fair, yeah, we have the personal property. That's a tough one. All these things you could say you have to sell it. The home. Anytime you have a house. You have real estate. If you're going to liquidate it, I would never sell it. I would always keep it, and I'd always use it as a cash flow asset. So even if if you inherited a house that had sentimental value, okay, you still want to have the expenses of that house being covered some way, somehow, some way by cash flow assets. So if I was leaving a house behind, it would probably be with the idea that I had other assets covering its costs, and then I would allow somebody to use it. So I might say, hey, to my descendants for as long as they want to continue to use it, and then I'd probably exchange it into more real estate or convert it over to a rental, or to allow somebody to buy it out of the estate. Someone's usually going to make that play. And the trustee can certainly sell it. Sometimes you may say, hey, I really want it to go to my eldest, or they have the option to live in it, and then the lease value is part of the distribution. It's like giving them rent. Hey, you live in the house. But anyway, the point is, it's just that it's not always what it seems, and when you start using financial tools, like the obvious one is what we call a wealth replacement vehicle, and I'll show you. I have three ways of creating it, but the wealth replacement vehicle is the way to do it. If you have a huge estate, the life insurance just by itself is a tremendous tool when you have a small estate. And then when you're in between, and when I say a big estate, I'd say over 10 million. So somewhere between the $500,000 estate and the $10 million estate, you're kind of in the mix of, hey, I can do a lot of different things, and it's just kind of adding it up and saying, what do I want it to be? When you have a modest estate, if you have the ability to put insurance on yourself, that's great. Do it. If you have a modest estate and you're not insurable, then you want to buy it on somebody who is. And you can own policies on third parties. And then what you're doing is you're pushing out you're building your dynasty, maybe a generation. But again, when you think about these things, don't think of in terms of 50 years, think of in terms of 200 to 300 years. A dynasty is a family that is successful for a long, long time. It doesn't matter if you weren't. What it matters is that you're positioning it so your kids or your grandkids can be. And this is one of the few areas where if you're diligently putting it aside, there's a huge upside to doing so at some point in the future. If you're paying for it just like any other expense, then that's one of the few areas, and specifically I'm looking at permanent insurance over here, where it's going to dump a bunch of cash. The other realm where you can get a lot of money is in this little realm here, real estate. The house is a liability during your life, so I don't look at it any differently than life insurance. You're paying for it, and yeah, then there's some cash there you could sell when you pass. The thing is that the house, especially in these amounts, is never taxable for you to sell anyway. They have these huge exemptions, 121 exclusions. So if I was going to plan the perfect scenario, I'd probably convert all my house equity into rentals and pass away in an assisted living, or you're living with your kids or something where you don't have that, you're not sitting on anything that needs to be liquidated. You just have assets that are going to continue on after you pass, and then there's a bunch of cash as a kicker. And frankly, as I get older, the thing that we never really consider is these benefits, like this million, this $500,000. Did I have life insurance on the third person? No, I didn't. That's accessible to you during your lifetime so that you don't deplete your estate. So it's still a benefit. For example, if you're terminal illness or if you're disabled, a lot of those will kick out money to assist you during that period of time, so you're not liquidating out everything else. All right, going back into our examples, let's just open your mind a little bit. And this isn't a pitch on life insurance. There's not too many vehicles that do that. What are our tools in the toolbox? Obviously, we have our boxes, the corporations, the LLCs, limited partnerships. We have IRAs, individual retirement accounts, QRPs, which is qualified retirement plans like 401ks, profit sharing plans, defined benefit plans, things like that, IULs, which is Index Universal Life, whole life, annuities. Annuities work for people who want to make sure that they do not outlive their cash. So I'm not a big annuity proponent, but I understand that they're very effective. If you have $1 million and you don't know whether you're going to live 30 or 40 years or 20 years, the annuity is the thing that gives you the fixed amount so that you can kind of budget for yourself. You don't have to worry about outliving your cash. In which case the insurance company is hoping that obviously that you kick early so that they can, they make money as opposed to you live long. And then it's the opposite when you're dealing with whole life or IUL. They're kind of hoping that you're paying in for a real long time and that they're not kicking out the death benefit early on without receiving payments for it. We have living trusts and other trusts. The two main types of trusts we have are irrevocable trusts versus revocable trusts. One you can change, one you can't. So when the one trust that I haven't talked about is the asset protection trust, which is an irrevocable trust. This is just a fancy way of saying if you put money aside, and by the way, I just have Nevada sitting up there because it was rated A+, but there's South Dakota, Alaska, Delaware, a lot of places have really good irrevocable trusts. Nevada consistently gets rated #1, um, just because there's a ton of reasons, but it's a topic of another day. But what they do is when you put money into an irrevocable trust, it's outside of your estate from that point forward, for the most part, unless you make them defective for tax purposes. So again, we can go down a rabbit hole, but you can create an irrevocable trust. Most people use irrevocable trusts for passing something on that they no longer need to a generation, or they're trying to keep something outside their estate. So they have a very large estate and they don't want the estate tax being triggered. So they'll gift money to like an irrevocable life insurance trust that'll pay money to beneficiaries so that there's cash. How would we go about finding properties that have a low vacancy rate, a strong job market, at a low startup? How to reserve these? What places are trusted? How would you suggest someone who is starting? April, that is such a good question, and we are going to be talking about that in January. We're going to be doing it. We're going to be going over 3 webinars, 3 webinars on real estate, and we're going to get into that in great detail. I remote buy, and to give you an idea, I've purchased 28 properties this month. I probably bought 50 this year. I'm not somebody who sits on the sidelines and pretends. I will tell you what I do. I will tell you what people I know do. I own real estate all over the country. Commercial, I own it with partners. I own it individually. I like to play in that area. The real estate webinars, I will give you exactly what we do. So that, and the proof is in the pudding. There was somebody who attended a few of these. Actually, there's a small group, and if you'll hear her story, you'll hear a few people's stories where they made significantly more than they were doing in their job, just playing around in the real estate market. That's a cash flow asset that people want. And there's a value for finding it, there's a value for managing it, there's a value for buying and selling it. So it's tremendous. One of the few areas, so I'll show you a lot of those things. Can you buy IUL for your kids, friends, coworkers? Is it tax deductible? So no, it's not tax deductible. Yes, they can be owners on policies. The question is whether you have an insurable interest. So for your kids, yeah, you can purchase a policy on them, especially if you're in bad health, or if you just want to seed something for them and then transfer ownership to them at some point in the future. Or I'm trying to think, usually don't deal with whether you transfer. Usually you're just keeping it on them and then inheriting it. You're giving it over to them when you pass. The good thing about having an IUL, like even on your children, is you have access. It's your policy, so you have access to the cash value if you need it as you get older. So it's kind of a safety net. As Greg kind of went over last week, you can have a tremendous amount of money sitting in your cash value, and it's never taxable to touch it. So I can live off of it, as opposed to if you're dependent on an IRA or a 401k, you're forced to receive that money as taxable income, unless you have a Roth, in which case then you don't have to pay tax on it. But the cash value of an insurance product is fantastic. I have 3 of them. So if it sounds like I'm not an insurance salesman either, I don't. It's not what I do. I just will tell you what's good. What's good to me are cash flow assets and things that give you big advantages, low disadvantages, but the advantages are really, really good for people like us that are looking to create something that's going to be, live a lot longer than us. The people that don't buy life insurance or don't care about it are the people that don't care about the people they're leaving behind. The people that do buy these types of policies are the ones that are saying, hey, I'm creating a legacy. So when you see IULs and things like that, that used to be the purview of only the really, really rich, and they would create all sorts of funky products that the feds had to create rules to curb how much they could get out of it. So there's something called a modified endowment contract, which means the death benefit has to always be a certain point greater than the cash value. Because guys would have these low death benefit policies and they dump all their cash into it because it grows tax free and they can access it tax free and then it's passed on tax free. So that's usually a pretty good sign that it's pretty potent. The 98% haven't figured out how to use it. They're still using term. And term is 99% likely not to benefit you in any way. That's 98%ers. The 2% buy permanent, and they buy IULs, things that they can't lose value in. Somebody just said Greg was a pleasure to work with. He's a good guy. I've known him went to law school with him, so a long, long time. All right, so we'll keep going on. I have to watch myself. I'll start pontificating. So let's keep going back to the beginning. If financial stewardship is the assumption of responsibility of the financial well-being of another or a group, that means that we're looking at this not just for ourselves, we're looking at this for other people. Not everybody else knows the information you know now, which means you could do one of two things. You could either just know it yourself and say, hey, I'm going to create a plan that benefits my family, knowing what I know, and you'd be very successful with it. You don't have to have a lot of money. You can make a very effective plan that's going to create, $1 million payday for your family for, $5,000 a year, depending on your health. Like these types, it's not like it has to be astronomically high. You do you do that, it's a lot better than dumping money into a thing that's going to get hammered away in tax. Like if I go back to my buckets. Where's my bucket numbers? I mean, it's not even close. This is $5,000 a year. So depending on what you live till, so let's say that you're on average and you live till 75, you're guaranteed to be toast if you're putting it in cash. You're not leaving much behind if you're putting it in an IRA. But you are leaving a nice chunk of change behind, at least $400,000, if all you do is one thing. That's the third bucket. But that's the only thing that really leaves anything for those behind. And this doesn't equate your real estate or other things, but that's a big chunk of cash. Not too many people have access to that type of trust fund and understand what that money is used for. You don't have to say you get it. It's there to benefit my family. What if you said, the only thing I want to make sure of is that my family is always educated? That's their college fund. I've known people that just put it, that's all they do with it. It's not like on the day that you pass, that $400,000 is now doing nothing. It will continue to grow. If it's shepherded right, and if they put it into right things, and if you educate the other people that you're leaving behind, and your kids are doing the same thing you're doing, and they're teaching their grandkids, it'll perpetuate itself. That's what the Kennedys and the Rockefellers did. And I'm not being cheeky about that. The Kennedys have a total of 11 trusts. That's their wealth. It doesn't get taxed again. Once it's in there, the income gets taxed, but nothing else. And they're usually just distributing it out. So you're creating a seed that's going to allow harvesting for years to come, for generations to come. So all we're doing is we're putting something in place that then, hey, look at that. It's just continuing to go on. Somebody's asking, what IUL do you use? We don't use any particular company. Greg, my partner, has licenses. He brokers whatever's the best deal out there in the country. So beholden to people, you're paying for it. And if somebody makes their living selling life insurance, you're paying for that too. So you always want to go to somebody who just doesn't care, who brokers it out all over the place, doesn't make their living off of. You can tell whether somebody's making a lot of commission on something because you don't get any benefit out of it. The numbers always tell the tale. Your policy should be all paid up and looking good, and your cash value, if you need to pull that cash value out between 5 and 7 years, you should be able to pull the cash out that you already seeded it in if you needed it. Some of these things, it's 10 to 15 because the agent took a huge commission. So once you kind of know these things, my partner wrote a book, by the way, called The Private Vault. He was on last week, Greg, and it gets into the nitty gritty on this stuff. But once you know it, you're like, wow, yeah, it's pretty obvious. It'd be kind of like a car. If the car isn't worth much money the day you drove it off the lot, it means that that's the advertising, that's the pay to the commission to the dealership and everything else being taken off the top. If the day that you buy a policy, if it's not worth anything, that means that somebody got paid a chunk of change. It doesn't mean they're not entitled to get paid something. It just means that you can kind of tell. So if you buy a car and it loses 90% of its value the day you drive it off the lot, don't do that. If you drive a car off the lot and it loses 20% of its value, I mean, yeah, that's probably what the manufacturer and the sales guys got. So again, you can usually tell. But anyway, so you can. Is it more advantageous to have a few ILs? You can have one and direct the proceeds. It always depends, Maureen. I have three for three different reasons. I have a key man policy that dumps money into the firm if something happens to me, death or disability, so that the firm can recover for my loss. I have a key man policy, or not a key man, but a buy-sell policy that my daughter is not a licensed attorney. She cannot own my interest in a law firm, so it pays her out so my partners don't have to come up with a bunch of cash. And then I have a regular policy that's just for me. You can have different policies for different things. Sometimes it's worth it to have different policies depending on what the attributes are that you're looking for. So if you have one that you want to put a bunch of cash value in versus one that you just want the death benefit, sometimes the companies that give you the best death benefit don't have the best investment options inside them. So like the whole life companies and the mutuals and things like that, whereas the IULs, quite often, we're trying to do the least amount of death benefit with the most amount of cash value benefit, which I hope that makes sense. You're using the insurance just as a, hey, we want the smallest amount of death benefit because that's where a lot of the cost is, and we want lots of money to go into our cash value, and that's where we can access it before we retire. So it always depends. And I'm not saying term is horrific. There's instances when you use it, if you have a short-term obligation that you want to cover and make sure, like if somebody sublets from you and you're worried that they may, what if they pass and it's a 10-year sublet on a commercial space, you don't want to be eating 5 years of rent or the damage. So you just say, hey, let's just get a term policy on you. They're usually a couple $100 a year or something like that. They're not horribly expensive, and it can cover a liability that's a finite period of time. That's fine, but just know going in that 99% likelihood is that was insurance. That was true insurance. It's gone. It's like buying car insurance. If you never get into a car accident, yeah, you threw your money away, but you had insurance. Here, that's not what I want. I want the death benefit. That's what I'm buying. I really want the death benefit, so I want permanent insurance. That way, I have a 100% likelihood that I'm going to use it. And the benefit's going to go to a third party, which goes back to that is assuming responsibility for the financial well-being of another or a group. The group you're worried about is your family or your charities or whomever. Like it could be whatever that group is your heirs. And so you're assuming responsibility for them. Let's see, didn't you also mention that it makes sense to get a policy with a small death benefit and put a small amount of money in the first year, then fund them more aggressively after the commissions have been paid? Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's people that do that too. The whole idea is to have, what will happen, and we're getting kind of into some upper end conversations, but what happens is there's something called a modified endowment contract. Policies cannot allow themselves mathematically to get into that situation where you have a taxable event. In other words, the death benefit always has to exceed the cash value. So if you do something that has a small amount of death benefit, yeah, there's smaller commissions. And then you want to make sure that you can put more money into it. Like the policy allows you, how much it allows you to put on an annual basis. So if I have a policy that's a $5,000 a year policy, and the following year I want to dump $50,000 into it. I want to make sure that I can do that. It's going to force up my death benefit. It's going to force it up. But I can do that as long as the policy doesn't have restrictions on how much I can dump into it. So there are people that do that, and they'll absolutely get something with a lower cash death benefit, and then they'll dump a bunch more cash into it the following year, year 3 or 4. Nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that you're testing it ahead of time so you're not precluded from doing that. And that's why you shop around. If you go to a captive insurance guy, they may not even have a product that fits, and they're going to sell you whatever's in the showroom. Kind of like, you go in for the car. They're always going to try to sell you what they have, not what they have to order or special order. All right, so financial stewardship is the assumption of responsibility of the financial well-being of another or a group. This is where it really comes into where you have to shift your thinking. It's no longer about you. And it may be that you're trying to be responsible for the people in your church or the people that you know, your friends, your parents, family members, whatever. It's just saying, hey, I'm going to come in and take a peek at what you got going on. It's not rocket science. In fact, if there's too much complexity, chances are it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Complexity serves itself well in asset protection, but it's not very complex. I may have 100 LLCs, but chances are they're all held by a single LLC that I own. And then I don't own it individually. I own it through my living trust. That's about as complicated as it should be. If you're seeing all sorts of crazy bond portfolio over here with 3 IRAs, and I'm trying to think of a scenario I just saw. Because we had 3 IRAs, no life insurance, a will, and a business, and 3 on the husband and a couple on the wife. And I'm just thinking, each one of those IRAs is carrying with it custodial costs on an annual basis. And they weren't putting that much money in these. At the end of the day, they were spending a ton of money just allowing someone to play with their money and get paid off of their money. And I just thought that stunk. You could get the same benefit with one IRA or one retirement account if you used a QRP, a single one, then a husband and wife could have used them together. You wouldn't have all those payments. And since you used a QRP, you wouldn't have custodial fees. And so imagine that IRA went on for 30 years. You just cut off all those expenses for 30 years. And that would have gone to the financial advisor. Are you able to reduce premium payments on IULs if need be? Yes. It's always part of the policy. That's something you always look at going in, but there's no penalty. So you may have a set amount, a minimum amount that you pay over the first 5 years that you'd want to target. And then if things change, obviously, then you don't want to just cancel out, but you can lower death benefits and things like that. You can also roll cash value. So like I had a variable universal life policy from '99. Seemed like a good idea. Got a guy, basically I got sold. I didn't know what I know now. And it was Kansas City Life, variable, was the market's going great, and did all right for a few years, but then the market got, was getting crashed, and I would lose money out of my cash value. I'd be like, this stinks. So I rolled it into an IUL where I could never go below 0. So never have to worry about losing money. That's what I like. I tend to be a little more conservative. So, but yeah, you can roll around between policies. All right. Back to the basics again. Remember that the more you are involved, let me just look at this. Time, value. The more you are involved in your estate, the less it's going to be worth. What you want is to put this thing on autopilot so that over time your value is going to go skyrocketing. In order to do that, you do have to put a few things in place. Basic things that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to allow the you're going to end up having to use a trust. You're basically going to have to allow somebody else um, to take up the baton when something happens to you. And there's a few different ways that we can set this into play. Some of it during our lifetime, some of it after we've passed. But you have to create it all during your lifetime, and then some of it's going to be triggered later. So the first one that would allow us to create a dynasty that goes on and on and on for years and years and years is to create irrevocable trusts during your lifetime. This is for what I call like very rich. You're trying to keep this out of your estate. So again, just because we're going to pick on these folks, just because they've been in the public eye, but you look at James Gandolfini, the gentleman who was in The Sopranos, who was Tony Soprano. He lost $20 million because of the way he structured his estate. And if he had used an irrevocable trust during his lifetime and given the asset that way, he could have potentially avoided it. For realistically, he probably should have just had everything go to his spouse and allow her to, and that doesn't mean giving her the asset. It means making her a beneficiary during her lifetime instead of just giving these things all over to the siblings. He would have been much better off to use the irrevocable trust during his lifetime to transfer the asset. Even if he had just given it to his siblings, every year he could have done that and maxed out, at a minimum, his lifetime exclusion just on them, and then had the rest of it run over to his wife and then go to the kids after she passes. And then there was things she'd be able to do too. But using irrevocable trust during one's lifetime, for the most part, the most obvious one that people use is the irrevocable life insurance trust to make sure that the life insurance does not create more estate tax. Again, this is for people that are over the $10 to $11 million. Now, this is what's more commonly used, which is when you have real estate with trusts. What this allows you to do is have the real estate not have to be liquidated or divided up. So, for example, let's say that somebody passed away in the year 2007 and their estate was tied up going through probate until mid-2008. What do you think happened to the value of the real estate? And now they're having to sell it to divide it up, as opposed to if it was in a living trust or some sort of trust. If the market was starting to tank, they could have dumped it, or more better would have been saying, hey, don't dump it, hold on to it, just cash flow it. Hopefully you have some wealth replacement vehicle like a life insurance product that's able to give you some cash so you don't have to sell. There's no debt on this thing. And you just allow it to just to generate capital for the trust. And then as of right now, our real estate's back to before, probably 2007, 2006 range again. It since took it 10 years to recover, but real estate generally recovers. There's very few situations where it doesn't. You could always be up in the Detroit area with a bunch of real estate, but that's why you don't tie somebody's hands either. You allow them to dump properties as they need be. You don't make them stick with it. I call it dropping the brick. If you're holding a brick, eventually at some point you got to decide to let go of it. It's just knowing that you're holding a brick. But what that does, what you do is you create a situation where you're not forcing the sale, especially at a time when it may not, you may not even be able to get but a fraction of the true value of that real estate it was when the plan was created. So you want to allow time to be your friend, not to harm you. And then this is going to be the most obvious one. Once we start talking about all different asset classes, it's usually in wealth replacement vehicles with trust. Trust keeps you out of probate. A wealth replacement vehicle is a fancy way of saying something that dumps cash into your estate when you die. The most obvious is life insurance. I'm not really sure of what could be another one. I suppose if you have investments that have buyouts on them, then there might be some notes and things like that that dump in. So if your partner is in a business and the day you die, they agree to pay an income stream into your estate, that could be it. But you don't want it to go through a courthouse, because then you have appraisers, you have lawyers sniffing around it, and then you usually get in a fight over it. The court could order the liquidation of the asset. You just want to stay away from that. You want to keep control. And if you remember, one of the principles that I taught earlier tonight is it's about control, not ownership. The trustee owns it on behalf of the beneficiaries. The trustee owns it on behalf of the trust, and the trust is ultimately there for the beneficiaries. It's about control. The beneficiaries are who I care about. If we give up control, chances are the beneficiaries are the ones that are going to be hurt. The other wealth replacement vehicle is life insurance, and it dumps a bunch of cash in. And so if I go back over, let's go back to and visit our three friends. The biggest distinguishing factor between those three examples was this wealth replacement vehicle. And I say replacement. If you are over a $10 million estate, you almost have to do this, because there's no way you want to liquidate your assets to pay taxes. It may be inevitable. You may have on $5 million in excess, say you have a $15 million estate, and 4 of it would then be taxable. That would be a $1.6 million tax bill. You're going to, and it's, the tax is calculated on the gross value of its fair market value, not on what it sells for. So just to give you horror stories from 2007, there was an estate where somebody passed in 2007, and the ranch and the real estate was worth, I think it was like $20 million. And by the time they got through to probate and through fighting over it, and then the sale finally occurred, the tax on that was, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I think it was $9 million. It was a huge amount of money. Excuse me, it was probably closer to the eight range. We didn't have much of a huge exclusion, and the numbers, I'm going to say, it must have been worth more than 20 million. But the tax was in excess of what the property could get on the public market. So let me actually walk you through that. I'm going to make it in the terms of almost like a hypothetical. Let me see if I can just get rid of this whole thing. There. So we had real estate, and we'll just call it on date of death. The IRS values it, and let's just say, for sake of argument, that it was 20 million is what that value of that real estate was. We had an exclusion during those years, but it wasn't the 5 million. It was still, I forget the exact dollar amount. Let's go look at it. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that it was $6 million of tax on that 20 million, which means we should have a net estate of $14 million going to the heirs. The problem is this 20 million would have date of death. This was 2007. By the time they were looking to sell, it was in 2009. We're in the middle of this recession where they cannot sell that for the life of them. And the value of the estate shrinks. They still owe the tax, and they owe it now. It's got penalties and all this fun stuff. By the time they sold that, it was for less than the 6 million. They would sell it and net zero. This 14 million would go down to zero because they're able to sell it for about what the tax bill is. The IRS doesn't care. Now, they're always going to tell you, hey, it's only 1% or less than that. Yeah, you're right. It's not everybody that gets hit with it. But it's like a shark attack. When they do get hit by it, it's usually pretty spectacular. Um, Using last thing, provisions that you want to have in your trust itself. So rather than just give an asset away, and this is what most practitioners do, they just say, hey, who do you want to give it to? Oh, you should, don't just give it to them. Maybe put, maybe say you have to be 21 or something like that. Hey, don't give it to them when they haven't gone to college. Okay, that's a minimum. What you want to do is explain what they have as far as access to the actual cash, the principal, not just the income, but the principal itself. You leave $1 million, you want to be very specific about when can they dip into that principal and who decides. Otherwise, someone could just go in there and demand it. Hey, it's $1 million in there. Great, give me my portion. It's it's brother and sister, and the brother wants his $500,000 to go party it up. He's in college. He'd be the big man on campus if he can buy the Ferrari and provide cakes to his brothers. No, you wouldn't. You never want that situation. Or if somebody's going to go out and make a really bad decision, they decided that they're going to go trade futures, and they have no experience in it. But boy, somebody really sold them a hook, line, and sinker. They're ready to go dump all their money into it. If you don't think that happens, I've seen it happen quite literally. I want to say probably well over the hundreds, if not thousands of times. I've seen people just decimate themselves with the greed or the belief that there's quick money somewhere. Special needs. If you have somebody that's got special needs, you want to make sure there's provisions in your trust document that specify how they get proceeds and that they don't harm themselves or cause themselves to lose benefits because there's money there. All too often you'll have somebody named a beneficiary, and I review documents all the time. It's the minority that has special needs provisions. And we're talking about prominent law firms all over the country, and more likely than not, they're going to try to get you into a will because they get to probate it. But when they do a trust, usually it's a very, very weak trust because, frankly, it's not in their best interest to have something that's a complete document. That's probably not the nicest thing to say. Get some hate mail from other lawyers, but the point is that's the truth. I see these documents, and quite often I'm just shocked. It's talking about the distribution of the estate, and it's very good at that, but it doesn't talk about when you shouldn't distribute the estate. And the most common situation is when somebody doesn't have the capacity to know what to do with the money. And if somebody has special needs, they're not going to be able to manage the money, but even moreover, if they have special needs, chances are they're receiving state benefits, and by giving them money, you could cost them those benefits. The other section is a credit shelter. This is a fancy way of saying you can't have the money if somebody's trying to take it. Don't give the money to third parties. Don't give the money to the ex-spouse who says that they should be entitled to it, or hey, he's not paying me enough alimony, or she's not paying me enough alimony, and therefore I should be able to dip into your trust. Well, that's not what you put it there for. You put it there to benefit your kids and your kids' kids, and not ex-spouses. So hey, trustee, don't give it to her or him. Give it, if there's an ex-husband or something trying to get alimony, or ex-wife, more likely trying to get alimony, pay things directly into rent or vehicle, or just don't distribute the money if it's going to go to them. It may mean that there's no distribution. Okay, then the principal is preserved and will go for another generation. The other thing we use is lineal descendants. It means quite often when I do kind of the higher end planning on the asset protection trusts, I'll use the term the lineal descendants of my maternal and paternal grandparents, meaning my parents, me, my kids, And I could always define that, or an adopted child is considered a lineal descendant, but it's not going to stepkids. In other words, somebody gets married and they're the Brady Bunch. Your job is to take care of your kids and your kids' kids. If they adopt them, then great. But if they don't adopt them, and they're somebody else's somebody else's children too, then your job is to take care of your kids' kids, not your kids' spouse's kids. That's somebody else's job. And so I'll quite often just put in there, it's a blood trust. It's not going to go to a bunch of other children that are only children by way of marriage. I mean, again, think of this. A lot of times we think of young children, but I'm thinking of adult children. You get married later in life. Spouse passes and they remarry, and they're at 60. And somebody has adult children. You don't want your estate going that direction. It could go there. So you're just saying, hey, lineal descendants, my kids, make sure that it's going to my bloodline. Awards, you can put incentives. So somebody was saying, hey, what if they went to Danny classes? That's fantastic. You could actually specify, give you $5,000 for every first step you go to, something like that. $3,000 for every dynasty. And then if they don't exist any longer, you could, you just say, or similar in our trustees, judgment, something similar. You don't have to do that. You could put $1,000. Probably wouldn't put that 5,000. That's crazy. But you could always say, hey, we'll cover it. You can always specify and give direction to the trustee too. Hey, I want them to. There was one person who said, I want them outside of the country for 3 weeks in order to be a beneficiary. Okay. You could always give direction to the trustee to assist them with it. Doesn't mean they have to do anything lavish, but they could say, hey, provide them with the bare necessities so that they have the ability to go see the world. So there's go. That was the type of thing I was thinking 3 weeks. I love that. Yeah, you just say, hey, go out and see the world and see what it's about. I went to school in another country, studying the European Union before it was enacted. So it was pretty eye-opening when you have 24% unemployment amongst the 20-somethings, and they're ordering that certain industries not produce. Like, that sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. And that was, I forget what year that was, 90-something, 91, 92. But the point is that the more you travel and the more you get around, then you'll probably have a different view of the United States. You'll probably be able to view people differently. People that tend to isolate tend to, be very opinionated and fearful. So you want them to go out and see the world and think differently. Realize that there's a lot of opportunity that we take for granted and we don't take advantage of. So that's something that people feel strongly about. That's something you can put in your document. And then the last one is the health, maintenance, education, and support. And this is a big one for if you have minor children. So if you name in your estate plan that you want to make sure that your minor children are taken care of if something happens to you, that's a big thing. You want to not just take care of people while they're with you, but if you're assuming responsibility for them, you want to make sure that until they're able to make decisions on their own, that somebody's that you believe should be teaching them is teaching them. So you don't leave it up to the state. And also, if you are entrusting somebody that you care about, you don't want to make it a hardship. And so this health, maintenance, education, and support for your beneficiaries, it doesn't mean you have to leave money to the person who's watching over your kids. The money is going to be there for your kids, for their health, maintenance, education, and support. And that support's the big one. Your trustee is able to help that party who is now taking your children. And let's say you had 3 kids and they had 3 kids. Now they have 6. They're going to need to get a bigger house or add on a room or something like that. Your money that you put into this document, into this estate plan, is going for their benefit. It's going to enable them to receive benefit. So and then your trustee could say, hey, we're going to assist you with this, and then When it's all said and done, then we want to get paid back. If if the house is increased in value or whatnot, you can do all sorts of things. They will loan you the money. We'll provide you with living expenses of $2,000 a month, so that the three kids, you don't have to worry about food and things like that. The money is there, but it's not going to be there if you don't have a bunch of cash dropping into it. So it always goes back to that same thing. You need that cash infusion, and it's not going to happen if you're just sticking it in an IRA. So you want to have that to where that pops in and takes care of them. So I hope that makes sense. And then after they reach the age of majority, no matter what the situation, like I don't even recommend that people give percentages to kids on an annual basis, like 4% a year or something like that. There's a lot of practitioners that's what they like to do. Hey, give them 4% a year. It's gone within one or two generations, like guaranteed. If you're giving that plus, you're giving them the principal. You just keep that principal intact and you allow the income of the asset to continue to dump in, and you teach your kids to then add more money to the trust when they pass. It becomes their beneficiary, and it becomes the thing that allows the family to grow. You do this for 2 or 3 generations, you're going to have a huge amount of cash. If you do this for just yourself, you're still going to probably be okay. But you get your kids to buy in on this, and they're not taking money out of it, that when they're done, they've put the same amount back in that you did, and they teach their kids. That's where you create something that's going to continue to stockpile on itself. And it's able to handle the unexpected situations, somebody getting cancer and they weren't able to get it, they didn't have they didn't have insurance the way we're talking about. Like if you have an IUL and you get cancer, you're able to access the death benefit so that you're not becoming a burden on somebody else. You don't, then you're going to see an estate get depleted pretty quickly. So here's the safeguard. Here's a bunch of cash that's sitting there that's enabled them to do these things, to put these things in place. But if they don't, and somebody makes a mistake or just doesn't have it, or it just wasn't in place, there's still money there to help them. And it's not going to kill the entire estate. There's still seed capital there. But it does allow them, or if they're going to go to, hey, somebody gets into Harvard and it's a ton of money every year, the money's there. You guys aren't even thinking about it. Hey, the money's there. It's there to enable them to take advantage of that opportunity. Everybody gets educated, to the extent that you want them to be. You can say, here's the types of things I want them to do. Like, do you want them to go to, some university and learn basket weaving? You may say no. I want them to stick to the sciences, or hey, it's really important to me that you get a Bachelor of Science or something like that. You can always be specific and say this is what the money's for. It's up to you. What you believe. It's your dynasty, not somebody else's. You don't have to do what other people do either. I use examples. At the end of the day, it is your dynasty, not mine, not what popular society believes. God knows they're wrong 99% of the time. It's what you in your heart believes is right for your family, and that's what your obligation is, to take care of your family or those that you care about or those things that you believe are important. I don't judge on it. I always just look at it and say, how do I make what you want a reality? And if you believe something's important, then it is important. And so I will do my very best to put something in place for those people that tell me what they want. Some people say, well, what do other people do? Okay. Well, that's not what you want. Then you're just you're trying to do what other people do. And I always use examples, but I can say in my experience, which is all I have to go off of, the experience of myself and others, I can say that there's definitely some things that work and definitely some things that don't. And I always share those with the people that I work with. But these are the things that you definitely want to have in your documents. And these things, if you put them in place, it's really hard to have a plan that blows up and doesn't do what you want it to do. These are the things that allows it to continue to be successful. If you just give your asset away, the averages are against you. That money will last for less than 2 years for whoever you give it to. If you keep it intact, then mathematically you can make it to where it can't be depleted. And yeah, they're not getting the benefit of all the money. I always say, like, if that's important to you, that they get the advantage of all your money, then give it to them. Then don't worry about what they do with it. But if what you want is to benefit somebody, then probably the thing you want them to do is to work hard, learn how to get a leg up. But here's a little benefit. Like if someone had covered I went out to college on scholarship for the most part, for most of it. I was athletic and then switched over to academic. But boy, I mean, I didn't have living expenses on a lot of it. That little bit would have been very helpful. Or tuition. That would have been extremely helpful. Law school was like, it was painful monetarily. It would have been nice to have that benefit. I didn't need any other help, and any help would have been very welcome, even if it was a few $1,000s a year. It would have made a big difference. So don't feel like you have to cover everything. It may just be that you're providing a little bit. And if you're doing it, and other people are doing it, and you have a couple generations, then eventually you have a very, very, very successful family. They would be getting the advantages of what they want depending on what they do with the tools they are given to them. Absolutely. That's it. And you're giving people that, I mean, for lack of a better word, most of the trust companies out there are very good because they are true fiduciaries, which means they can't lose the money. They can't be in a situation where they cause people, so they're very conservative. And so if you create something and you say, hey, here, this is what's important to us, they will follow it. And they will do it for 100 years, 200 years if you want them to. And they're not stuck. If the beneficiaries hate them, they can replace them, but they have to replace them with another fiduciary. They can't bring their buddy in. They can't hire a family member. It has to be a licensed fiduciary that's an uninterested party. You put that type of thing in play just so there's always somebody there who's going to act reasonable. And it's not going to be swayed. So that gets us almost to the end of where we're at for this one. What did we learn? Doing the right thing, system and supervision, which is really that last slide, is you're putting things in place to make sure that people can't blow themselves up. Why judges make us miserable is the probate process. It's basically they take the power away from us and they think they're doing the right thing. These courts are set up to do the right thing. It's just that they've become it's become a situation where it takes the money away from us and takes a lot of time that we can ill afford away from us. If we put a plan in place, we don't need it. 3 ways to build multi-generational wealth that cannot be taken away. We went over a bunch of different examples. Let's say we did more than 3. When you put it into a trust, when you create an irrevocable trust, when you put it in a trust, even just putting real estate into a living trust, or if you couple it up with life insurance, that's money that goes into a plan that cannot be taken by third parties. We showed you how to protect it in the event that there's special needs from spouses, from remarriages, from kids doing bad things, from dependency, all of those. You show ways that it's not going to be taken away by third parties. All right, this is the fun stuff. We went through the first 5 steps. You guys are all now able to join us on the monthly meetings, and so you'll be getting notifications, I think the first week of January. What is it, like the 2nd or the 4th or something like that. Just pop open my calendar and I could be able to tell you. We are going to have another monthly meeting. We go over all sorts of fun subjects. It'll be the 4th. So you'll get a notification on that. Now the real estate events start on January 9th, and there's going to be 3 of them. These are going to be 3-hour deals, but this is going to be fun. Talking about protecting assets, it's not always the greatest thing. I know it's sometimes dry. And there's a lot of big words. When we get into the real estate, now we're talking, because you can just talk. You can talk about broken windows and stuff like that. Now, there's some really cool stuff. I'm going to bring in a guy that works with HUD, that does foundations and works in how you can put yourself on the same level as government agencies as far as buying properties before they go to the public. I'm going to have a guy that does assisted living, showing you how right now assisted living is a huge underserved area, and how you could take even existing properties and turn them into cash flow generators. I think the typical assisted living facility is netting somewhere around $10,000 a month if you're doing private pay. And so they'll show you some of those things. That's pretty darn cool because it's not the typical rental house. It's the ones that people don't want as rental houses because they're too nice. And so they become great assisted living facilities for 4 or 5 people. And how you can make profit doing that. We're going to talk about wholesaling, where we've had folks that have turned a little bit of knowledge into a lot of money without having to put any of their own money down. That's wholesaling. Flipping, those of you who are contractors, I'll show you how to crunch the numbers. It's pretty cool. There's just a lot of stuff that we're going to be going over. There's easy adage in the real estate, which is you wholesale to flip and flip to buy and hold. And then we'll go over everything from single-family residences to apartments to commercial. So that's always cool, and I always bring in people that do this stuff for a living, meaning that they're actively involved in the real estate market, and they come in and they're usually guests. So that's always fun. It's the time we did it was first time we did it. We've had some people just take off and really explode in that realm. And it's not uncommon. I've been doing this for a long time, and that's one of the areas. I know that Danny and Hans, their biggest wins were out of the real estate realm. They've had some huge ones. I think a $2 million flip. So sometimes you buy something and you don't even know that you're going to end up selling it. You don't intend to, but then the market just dictates it's time. If you buy them for cash flow, then you don't care what the market's doing. And if somebody comes up and makes you that offer, you can't refuse. All right. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, right? All right. So we'll get notice on that, and that'll be a ton of fun. So I hope you got a lot out of these. I know every time I do them, I know they're long. Got to understand, I sit in an office and talk to myself for 3 hours. But every time I do them, I think that I always feel like I'm hopeful that certain pieces are sinking in, and that you're able to make changes that benefit not just you, but your community, the people that are around you. It's quite often I get stories of parents, uncles, brothers, sisters, people that we're actually able to catch in the nick of time, some people that we don't get to until something bad's occurred, but then at least they're willing to take it and learn from it and do something to make changes. And those are sometimes the best people out there, the ones that are saying like, look, hey, I didn't do this, and this is the price I paid. I don't want you to pay that price, and so do X, Y, and Z. As always, I'm accessible to you guys. Hopefully you guys are Platinum members. There's lots and lots of videos in our Platinum area. I'm going to be cutting a ton this next quarter. We're revamping a lot of our videos, and so the next, I would say, 3 or 4 months that we're very prolific on it. I know that my schedule is just stacked. With doing a lot of live recordings, so that'll be a lot of fun. Let's see, somebody's asking about access to the recordings. So you guys should be getting emails after these from our office. I know that Justin Kempis, who has been to, I think he's been to both First Steps and Dynasty. Yep, he has. Who handles a lot of our recordings. He puts them into YouTube and gives you guys the links to them, to where you can go in there and check them out. If you're not able to get those, it says, what if we're not getting the emails with the recordings? You should be. Check your spam. You're in the system. If you're not, shoot me an email just at tmathis, and I'll forward it and make sure you get the links. emathis@alglaw.com or andersonadvisors.com or bossoffice.com. All of those will get you there. You should be getting it, just because if you're getting these links, then you're on the list. So unless it's getting blocked, it'll probably go over to a spam or something, because it's from it takes you over to the YouTube channel. But we put them all there so you can get to them. And don't feel like you got to hoard them. The recordings, I don't care if you share them. Let's see, they sent one after the first one only. It said the recordings can be found in a link provided in that one email. Okay, I'll make sure. Yes, I was giving my mom a perm. That's so sad. Hey, go back and watch some videos. Um, Hopefully they're better the second time around, and then share them with other people. I don't really worry about it. When we do these live, then that's the big one. It's for those of you guys who get on these and spend the time. That's where the dedication really is. It's always good to do the video, but there's something about a live event, and then we're going to do some more stuff. So you guys are going to be part of the monthly deals, and then we're probably going to put together some videos. Last time I did a general, I don't want a tax planning, asset protection. Uh, oh, can't read my email. Oh goodness, it's a T, it's an M, it's an A, it's a T, it's an H, it's an I, it's an S, and then this is an @ sign or whatever it is, and then any of our websites. So you can use Anderson Advisors, Boss Office, or ALGLAW.com. No, I'm just saying geez because my handwriting stinks so bad. Nothing that you did. I'm sorry about that. No, I always kind of laugh. It looks like cat scratch, and you could see. You should see my signature. It's just as bad. What day of the month does the monthly fall on? It's Wednesday nights. It's the first Wednesday of every month, and those are also recorded. And I just can't say enough about it. Like we've had some really cool ones. They're not always, all that, but every now and again you get one. This last one was again Marquet, she legitimately took less than, I think it was 2,000. It was 1,000 from her, 500 from her mom, and 500 from her sister, and blew it up to over $2 million in exactly 25 months. $2 million in the stock market doing trend trading and following the candlesticks. And when you start looking at that, it takes all the emotion out, and all you're doing is looking for patterns. And she goes over the topic of renting your stock, which is another fancy way of saying covered calls, which means that was just a really cool one. So hopefully you guys get all access to that. I'll make sure that Justin gives you access to that. And then I told her I'd have to bring her on. She's been my friend for 20 years and, was making, I think it was $13 an hour when she made all of her money. Consistently lives off of the stock market, and she calls it rent, which is she has her portfolio and she just sells options against them and takes the money in every month. No financial planner, no broker, no nothing. She does it all on the basic electronic thing, where kind of like a Scottrade thing. I think it's Interactive Brokers, but she's always fun. I always have to tell her to calm the language down, to get it to where we can understand what she's saying, because she talks techno sometimes, but wasn't a super genius financial person. She was just a customer service rep at a financial institution who read a bunch of books and learned the stuff, and then realized there's very simple things you can do, then repeat them over and over and over again, and that it can be fun. So that's just one example. Of course, we do the real estate and all that jazz, but when we talk about financial stewardship, it's all about learning, and so I try to bring people in that do it. So that is it. I thought you said the monthly was recording. We record them, but they're live. So we do the live event is always the first Wednesday of the month. Sometimes it gets pushed to the second Wednesday, but it's right in there, and then we record those so you can always watch them in case you miss it. We have a lot of stewards. Believe it or not, there's probably 500 of you guys, and not everybody can make the live. So we just keep growing, and then we're going to go over. They made mission, vision, values for the stewards, so we'll go over that too. And when you go to events, you have to find the stewards and sit down and chat with each other. There's a lot of really cool people out there. So you guys all have a very Merry Christmas, and if I don't hear from you, have a great New Year. And I just bless you all and hope that 2017 is absolutely amazing for you guys, that we're able to do a lot of good things and affect a lot of people in positive ways. And that's at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So have a great one, and I'll talk to you guys later.